Hello, your channel Eugene Light Novels greets you. I hope you are enjoying these beautiful novels. Now, let's continue with the novel, Marvel, Beginning Mutant, Hero SERA Template. First part. Chapter 1 1962, Awakening Variant Ability, Hero SERA Template. 1962, New York City, Brooklyn. An Asian youth was staring blankly at the unfamiliar environment in front of him, unable to come back to his senses for a long time. I have traveled through time? Brian was a little depressed. He was not from this world, but a traveler. One day ago, he traveled here and became an unknown watchmaker. Brian Kent, this is his current name. If it was just a travel, Brian would accept it with pleasure and would not be so irritable. Just because this is not a peaceful world. Yes, this is not a peaceful world, but a Marvel world where mutants are about to enter the historical stage. As for why Brian knew that this is a mutant world, the reason is simple, because Brian is a mutant. I don't know if it is a benefit for travelers, or if it was originally possessed by the original body. In short, as soon as Brian traveled through time, he awakened his variant ability. His variant ability is called, Seeing Through the Laws of Operation of Everything. His awakening variant ability is exactly the same as the super ability of the brain-cutting maniac SERA in the American TV series. Whether it is a super ability or a mechanical structure that is so complex that it makes people's heads tingle, Brian can master it through this ability with just one look. Moreover, the most terrifying thing is that when Brian masters the operating rules of a certain ability, the body's genes will be adjusted to allow Brian to obtain the same ability. In short, Brian can obtain this variant ability by observing the operating rules of the variant ability in the human brain. Moreover, because of the special nature of seeing through the operating rules of everything, when Brian obtains the variant ability, it will automatically optimize and improve, just like the ability enhancement of Apocalypse. In short, it is a one-click full level. And it is like using your arms and fingers, and you can use it freely without any training. Having the SERA super ability template makes Brian feel a little comforted. But he still can't be happy. The SERA template is very powerful. But it was also destined that his existence would be feared by the mutant group. And he was destined to embark on the path of constantly hunting mutants. Brian could already foresee that he would become a demon king like SERA, who would scare the mutants and even unite to fight against him. He would be independent of the mutant group and become the natural enemy of the mutants. This kind of mutant ability is simply the enemy of the whole world. Brian shook his head helplessly, laughed at himself, and then stood up. His eyes became extremely firm. At this moment, Brian had a kind of ambition to go forward with millions of people. Just kidding, that's a mutant ability. Who can resist the temptation of mutant abilities? Brian couldn't resist it anyway. What's more, as long as Brian wanted, he could get all kinds of dreamed-of mutant abilities, and the price was nothing more than not being accepted by the mutant group. That's all. Brian glanced at the calendar, which clearly showed the year 1962. As a time traveler, Brian definitely knew that the time point of 1962 was exactly the plot line of the first battle of Mutant. This year, young Magneto and Professor X got to know each other, and then fought against Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shao together. The first battle of mutants? It happens that I can fish in troubled waters and use Professor X's brainwave enhancer to find some powerful mutants for me. When he learned that the current timeline was the first battle of mutants, Brian had already thought of his future plan. That is to join the X-Men that Professor X had just formed, use Professor X's brainwave enhancer to find potential mutants, and then quietly plunder the ability of these mutants. Definitely, before joining the X-Men, Brian has one more thing to do. That is to obtain a mutant ability. The SERA template allows Brian's potential to reach the Omega level. However, if you don't plunder other people's mutant ability, Brian is almost no different from ordinary people. This is the limitation of the SERA template. If you want to become a powerful mutant, there is only one way to go. That is plunder. Plunder the ability of other mutants. Since he had made up his mind, Brian no longer wasted time. He picked up a simple watch from his watch shop and gently put it to his ear. Tick, tick. As the watch was placed to his ear, although it was obviously damaged, Brian heard the ticking sound of the parts inside the watch. At this moment, Brian seemed to be standing in a huge and complex mechanical structure. Countless parts were performing complex mechanical movements in front of Brian. However, such complex mechanical movements seemed so simple to Brian. It turns out that this is broken. After just 1 second of listening, Brian found the fault of the watch, and then he quickly opened the cover and adjusted a part. As the cover closed, the watch that had been damaged was restored to its original state. This is Brian's variant ability, the effect of seeing through the laws of operation of all things. He only needs to look at the mechanical structure to understand the laws of operation of the machine and master it instantly. He can also find out the insignificant inharmonious sounds in the operation of the machine by listening to the sound of the machine. This is the power of the ability to see through the laws of everything. Just like now, Brian only needs to listen to the mechanical sound of the watch to find out the problem and then easily repair it. Not only watches, as long as it is a mechanical structure, Brian can easily master its operating rules and then repair it. Wearing this Omega watch on his left hand, Brian tidied up his clothes that looked a little old, and then took out a Colt M1911 pistol from the drawer of the table. Brian put the Colt pistol in his arms and picked up the tool kit beside him. Everything was ready. Brian started his first hunting trip. Coming to the street, Brian looked at the prosperous and somewhat backward city, and gently stroked the watch on his left hand. I hope I'm lucky and can find 1 or 2 mutants of the same kind. Brian stopped a taxi and prayed secretly. At present, the only way Brian can think of to find mutants of the same kind is to wander around New York City, hoping to get lucky and meet 1 or 2 mutants. Although this is like looking for a needle in a haystack, it is the best solution Brian can think of. After all, he is just an ordinary person with no abilities. The initial SERA template is undoubtedly very weak. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 2 Brian's Luck, Darwin the taxi driver. Sir, you have already circled Brooklyn 3 times. Do you want to continue? In a taxi on the streets of Brooklyn. A black driver was looking at the Asian youth in the back seat through the rearview mirror with a strange look on his face, muttering in his rap-like words. Niger, shut up and drive your car. A cold voice came from the back seat. At the same time, there was a cold temperature on the back of the head, and the familiar touch made the black driver shudder. No offense, sir. The black driver wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and shut his mouth tactfully. Damn, is my luck so bad? On the back seat, Brian took back the pistol in a bit of annoyance, looking at the bustling crowd outside with a trance. Brian has been circling Brooklyn for 10 hours. During these 10 hours, Brian would blend into the most lively crowd every time he arrived at a place, and then expect his mutant ability to give an early warning. But what made Brian a little crazy was that his mutant ability never gave a warning. In fact, since awakening the SERA template, Brian could be like SERA, and when he met a mutant, his mutant ability would make a tick, tick sound like a machine running. As long as there was a mutant nearby, Brian's mutant ability would give a warning. However, he had been driving around Brooklyn for 10 hours, and his mutant ability had never given a warning. This only showed one thing. That is, in these 10 hours, he did not encounter a mutant. Are there so few mutants in 1962? Brian couldn't help but complain, and then directly ordered the black driver to pull over. After getting off the car, Brian signaled the black driver to leave. As for the fare? In such a free America, do I still have to pay the fare? Besides, I'm a mutant, can't I do whatever I want? Don't eat the sour radish. Until the black driver drove away, he dared to roll down the window and cursed at Brian. And Brian just raised his hand and fired a burst of bullets at the black driver. The black driver was so scared that he stepped on the accelerator and fled in a panic. After venting his anger, Brian felt much better. 10 hours of useless work made him more determined to join Professor X's team. Sometimes, it is necessary to properly rely on the power of others. Squeak. Just when Brian was standing on the side of the road, thinking about whether to give up this hunting plan, A green taxi stopped in front of Brian. "Sir, do you need a taxi?" In the taxi, a young black driver rolled down the window and smiled professionally at Brian. And Brian also smiled brightly. Because when the taxi driver was talking, the sound of mechanical operation like the sound of nature also rang in Brian's mind. Tick, tick. Brian was in a good mood after hearing the crisp and pleasant ticking sound. He glanced at the black driver, then opened the door and sat in the passenger seat. "Hey, bro, I suggest you sit in the back seat, which is more comfortable. Oh, by the way, let me introduce myself, you can call me Darwin." After hearing the black driver's self-introduction, Brian's smile became even brighter. Obviously, he found his kind. The taxi driver in front of him was a mutant. And he was a cannon fodder-level mutant who had appeared in the first battle of Mutant. "Darwin." "Hello, Darwin, nice to meet you. You can call me SERA." Brian did not follow Darwin's advice, and still sat in the passenger seat, saying something meaningful. "When you go out, your identity is given by yourself." Brian definitely won't tell Darwin his real name. When hunting, Brian has only one name, that is, SERA. "SERA?" Darwin looked at Brian a little strangely, obviously a little strange about his name. "Okay, Darwin, don't worry about the details. Can you take me around Brooklyn?" Brian waved his hand and said to Darwin. "Definitely, the customer is God. But, sir, are you sure you want to do this?" When Darwin heard Brian's destination, his first thought was to get rich. As a black taxi driver, he didn't care why Brian had such a weird ride request. As long as Brian could pay the fare, Darwin would be willing to go around Brooklyn, not to mention New York City. "Definitely, Darwin, just drive." Brian saw Darwin's doubts about his financial ability, and he took out a wallet from his pocket. The wallet was full of Maine. As a person who owns his own watch shop in Brooklyn, Brian is also considered a middle-class person. This little money is nothing to Brian. After seeing the Maine displayed by Brian, Darwin didn't hesitate for a second, and stepped on the accelerator directly, and started to go around Brooklyn. As the taxi started, Brian and Darwin chatted casually. What surprised Darwin was that Brian's talkativeness made him, a black driver, a little overwhelmed. During the chat, Darwin was surprised to find that this bro named SERA was actually a professor of genetic mutation. Brian definitely couldn't be a professor of genetic mutation. But facing a black taxi driver with a generally low level of knowledge and who had never been to school, Brian only needed to fool Darwin a little bit to make him believe in his identity as a professor of genetic mutation. As the saying goes, when you go out, your identity is given by yourself. Darwin, do you believe it? The world is changing. A small number of people will have their genes mutated, thus gaining the ability of ability. These people are undoubtedly God's favorites. Brian glanced at Darwin and said meaningfully. What Brian said made Darwin a little stunned. Ability? God's favorite? Darwin looked at the road ahead and was a little absent-minded. Since he awakening ability, he has always regarded his ability as a curse. Darwin never dared to show his ability. He was afraid of being regarded as an alien and a freak by the people around him. That is why, even though he has awakened the ability of survival of the fittest, he is still an unknown taxi driver. Brian's theory of ability and giftedness comforted him. He suddenly felt like he had to speak out. Professor SERA, have you ever found someone with ability and giftedness? Darwin turned to look at Brian and asked with some expectation. Darwin has been hiding his ability for all these years. This made him feel lonely, and he was eager to find people like him. Yes, Darwin, why do you think I am telling you this? Darwin, you are God's favorite. Brian turned his head, looked at Darwin seriously, and said with a chuckle. Professor? Darwin was startled, and he suddenly braked, and the taxi stopped at once. Relax, Darwin. I have been following you for a long time. You don't need to pretend in front of me. As I said before, you are God's favorite, the evolutionist, pioneer and hero of mankind. You should show your ability, not bury it. You should shine like a superhero. Instead of a black taxi driver. Brian spoke slowly, and his voice was full of appreciation and encouragement for Darwin. This made Darwin, who had never received attention, suddenly fooled. Can I be a hero? Darwin looked at Brian absent-mindedly and said uncertainly. Yes, Darwin, your ability will make you a dazzling star. Brian answered Darwin's question very affirmatively. Professor, what should I do? Darwin was indeed attracted by words like hero, and he looked at Brian with fiery eyes. Obviously, he had regarded Brian as his own mentor. Niger is indeed easy to deceive, especially mutant Niger, who is even easier to deceive. Looking at Darwin, who took the bait, Brian complained in his heart. Enjoy reading every day during the National Day holiday. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Top up now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 3 Soul Mentor Brian, Darwin's White Rat, and the Limitations of Darwin's Ability. Darwin, the first thing you need to do is to release your ability, not hide it. Brooklyn, Coney Island. A green taxi is quietly parked by the bay. Next to the taxi, Brian and Darwin are leaning against the door of the taxi. While smoking, they enjoy the beautiful scenery of the bay and have a good chat. Yes, they have a good chat. In the past hour, Brian has successfully shaped himself into a genetics professor who is looking for mutants. And in this hour, Brian also made Darwin believe in himself. He made Darwin firmly believe that he, SERA, is Darwin's mentor. It is the soul mentor who can shape Darwin into a hero. This is not difficult. Because the mutants of this era, originally were in a state of confusion and desire to be recognized. They are afraid that their identity as mutants will make people around them label them as freaks and monsters. And they are eager to understand their mutant abilities. That is why when Brian proposed the mutant glory theory to Darwin, Darwin was deeply involved in it. Everyone has a heroic dream, especially a mutant like Darwin. Release your ability? Darwin took a deep breath under Brian's encouraging gaze. He, Darwin, wanted to show Professor SERA his ability. He wanted to be a hero. Mutation and glory. At this moment, Darwin's eyes were full of spirit. He chanted the slogan Brian taught him in a deep voice. Then he resolutely walked to the front of the bay and jumped directly into the water. Plop. As Darwin jumped into the water, gills quickly evolved on his two cheeks. The gills opened and closed, allowing Darwin to breathe freely in the water. Professor, this is my ability. I call it survival of the fittest. My body can automatically adapt to the surrounding environment and then evolve corresponding organs. Darwin emerged from the water and introduced his ability with some excitement. Brian could see that as Darwin left the water, the gills on his face were rapidly degenerating and disappearing. Very good ability, Darwin. Of all the abilities I have seen, yours is the best. Brian did not hide his admiration, he gave Darwin a thumbs up and praised him. In fact, Brian was not lying. Darwin's survival of the fittest ability, in terms of potential, even surpassed Magneto, Professor X and others, reaching the Omega level. The ability to adapt to any extreme environment and evolve corresponding means of survival is simply a bug-level ability. If developed properly, even if Darwin is thrown into space, he can evolve to absorb cosmic radiation and thus obtain the ability to survive in the vacuum of the universe. However, even such a bug variant ability was used to bits by Darwin. Until his death, he was only in the ranks of the first-level variant ability. It was simply a waste of natural resources. This further strengthened Brian's determination to kill Darwin and plunder his variant ability. However, before killing Darwin, Brian needs to test the limit of Darwin's current ability to adapt. This is why Brian tried his best to make Darwin believe in himself. Darwin has the ability of survival of the fittest. Even if he is still very weak now, it will take some effort to kill him. Darwin, do you mind if I test your body? Looking at Darwin walking out of the water, Brian said directly. Definitely, Professor. Darwin, who believed in Brian, readily agreed. It must be said that some of the success stories that Brian learned in his previous life are still very useful, at least they have a significant effect on Darwin. Darwin now can't wait to become a superhero. Brian turned back to the taxi and picked up his toolbox from the co-pilot, which contained a complete set of watch repair tools. Brian took out a sharp knife from it, then walked in front of Darwin and nodded to Darwin. Swish! Brian unexpectedly used a knife to cut Darwin's right artery, and when the knife touched Darwin's arm, his arm suddenly became as hard as leather. The knife did not leave a trace on Darwin's skin. It was not until this moment that Darwin reacted belatedly. He looked at Brian, and did not expect that the genetics professor's actions were so fast and fierce. He was simply not like a professor. Test record: a knife to the artery is obviously lethal, which will be automatically judged by your body as entering an extreme environment state. Thus activating the ability of survival of the fittest, the body automatically undergoes adaptive evolution, and your skin becomes as strong as leather. Brian ignored Darwin, but instead began to record data seriously. Such a professional scene made Darwin, who had never seen the world, subconsciously obey Brian's orders. In the following time, Brian conducted various tests on Darwin. When burned by fire, Darwin's body will instantly enter an adaptive state, thereby gaining the ability to resist high temperatures. When a taxi collides, Darwin's body will be completely petrified in an instant, thereby offsetting the kinetic impact of the taxi. Shooting Darwin's heart with an M1911 pistol will cause Darwin's body to metallize and the bullet cannot penetrate its defense. According to Brian's test, as long as it is a lethal attack, Darwin's body will automatically adapt and evolve, thereby acquiring the corresponding confrontation characteristics. And through Brian's repeated tests, he found that Darwin's survival of the fittest is not fixed. Just like the same flame burning, Darwin's body adapted to develop flame-resistant skin that can withstand high temperatures for the first time. And the second time, Darwin's body skin directly absorbed the flame. After a long period of testing, Brian finally found that Darwin's survival of the fittest ability is also limited. First of all, it must be an extreme environment to stimulate Darwin's survival of the fittest ability. And scratching Darwin's finger with a knife, for example, will not stimulate his survival of the fittest ability. Secondly, Darwin's body can only adapt to one extreme environment at a time. In simple terms, if he is in water, his body will grow gills, giving him the ability to breathe in water. But if a gasoline bomb is dropped into the water will be set on fire. Even if Darwin is in an extreme environment, his survival of the fittest ability will not allow him to adapt to the fire resistance ability, but will be burned to death by fire. Even if Darwin's survival of the fittest ability is very buggy. But now Darwin is just a level 1 mutant who has never developed his own ability. This gives Brian a chance. Darwin, contribute the first mutant ability to me now. Now that Darwin's weakness is known, Brian is not going to waste time. In his brain, the mechanical ticking sound rang again. After so long, he is finally going to hunt for the first time. Have fun reading every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 4, Brainstorming, Darwin's Death, Brian's First Ability. At night, in front of the bay of Coney Island. Brian and Darwin sat on the ground, summarizing the previous test results while eating the sea fish caught by Darwin. With the long-term ability test, Darwin became more trusting of Brian. Maybe it was an illusion, he always felt that his survival of the fittest ability became stronger than before in the ability test again and again. Although this feeling was very weak, it also made Darwin feel the growth of ability. This was enough to make him grateful to Brian, the professor of genetics. Professor, I feel great now. My body has automatically adapted to the darkness, allowing me to gain night vision ability. Darwin was a little reluctant to share the changes in his ability with Brian. Just now, he gained night vision ability in the dark. This was something Darwin had never had before. Before meeting SERA, he had never gained night vision ability in the dark. But now, he has such an ability. There is no doubt that all this is the credit of this young professor. Darwin, you said you have gained the night vision ability now? Brian's eyes turned cold and dangerous when he looked at Darwin. It was as if a hunter was staring at his prey. Yes, Professor. Darwin, who was excited, did not notice Brian's unusual expression. He was immersed in the night vision ability brought by adapting to the dark environment. His eyes were emitting a faint light, as if they could dispel the darkness, and everything he saw was as bright as day. Darwin looked at the bay in front of him. The night vision ability not only allowed him to see things in the dark. At the same time, it strengthened his visual nerves, and he could keenly capture the changes in the surrounding light. This allowed him to even see the fish swimming in the water. Suddenly, Darwin glanced at Brian from the corner of his eye. He was surprised to find that Brian was pointing a gun at him at this moment. Huh? Professor? Darwin turned his head to look at Brian in confusion, wondering why Brian was pointing a gun at him. Relax, Darwin, this is just a simple little test. Brian comforted Darwin with a smile on his face. Darwin's ability is too buggy. Brian is worried that if Darwin can't be killed, he still has room for maneuver. After saying that, Brian pulled the trigger directly. Bang, bang, bang. A dull gunshot sounded, and just in case, Brian emptied the magazine directly. What's going on? Why doesn't my ability work? Darwin looked down at his chest in surprise. At this moment, streams of blood constantly flowed out of his chest. Darwin didn't understand why his ability of survival of the fittest was not activated. Bang! In Darwin's confused eyes, his body fell straight to the ground. Although his heart and lungs were shattered by bullets, Darwin did not die immediately. His variant ability, survival of the fittest, was passively activated and began to adapt to the injuries on his body. And began to try to strengthen the self-healing of cells to repair the damage to the body. Darwin's broken heart began to heal slowly. At the same time, Darwin's body began to adapt and evolve rapidly, forming a new oxygen-absorbing organ in his body. It's worthy of the ability of survival of the fittest. He's not dead yet. Brian walked up to Darwin and watched Darwin's body constantly adapt to his injuries, and couldn't help but marvel. Then Brian raised his gun again and shot Darwin's new organ. SERA. SERA, why? It was not until this moment that Darwin realized that Brian wanted to kill him on purpose. Poor Nig, there has never been unprovoked kindness or selfless help in this world. Everything has been marked in secret. Brian's cold answer made Darwin extremely angry. But he didn't even have the strength to speak at this moment. He could only hope that the ability of survival of the fittest would allow him to adapt to the current predicament. However, it was obvious that Darwin's wish was doomed to fail. Brian took out the dagger that he had prepared long ago from his pocket. Then, in Darwin's horrified eyes, he placed the dagger on Darwin's forehead. F***K, SERA, what are you going to do? Darwin felt the cold touch of the dagger, and goosebumps appeared all over his body. At this moment, Darwin felt like a lamb to be slaughtered. Darwin, take a deep breath, it's normal to feel a little pain. Brian glanced at Darwin, and then without wasting time, the dagger pierced Darwin's forehead. Amid Darwin's screams, Brian opened his brain. At this moment, Darwin's mind was open. The brain was completely exposed in front of Brian. As Darwin's mind was open, the mechanical operation sound in Brian's mind sounded again. At the same time, there were some sounds similar to the operation of mechanical parts. Finally waited for this moment, let me see what the operating rules of your ability are. Brian's face showed excitement. He couldn't wait to squat down and began to carefully observe Darwin's brain circuits. At this moment, Darwin's brain, in Brian's eyes, was quickly divided into independent function component areas. These functions correspond to various functions of the human body. There are memory centers, nerve centers, language centers, and so on. A minute later, Brian found the ability center in Darwin's brain. So, Darwin's ability runs like this. The variant ability that sees through the laws of operation of everything makes Brian instantly understand all the secrets of the variant ability in Darwin's brain. Tick, tick. As Brian understood Darwin's variant ability, his brain began to operate like a complex machine. His brain and body began to adjust themselves. It was like adding DLC to his body. In just a moment, Brian's body already had Darwin's variant ability. Brian stood up and carefully felt the changes in his body. At this moment, Brian's eyes were glowing, and his pupils kept shrinking and adjusting. The originally dark environment was as bright as day in Brian's eyes. Just after Brian obtained the ability of survival of the fittest, his body had adapted to the night vision ability in an instant. Not only that, Brian came to the edge of the bay and then jumped down. The moment he touched the sea water, Brian's neck on both sides automatically adapted to fish gills. At the same time, his limbs also grew fins like swordfish, and golden fish scales grew on his skin. At this moment, Brian was like a graceful fishman. Whoosh! Brian slightly exerted force on his arms in the water, and the whole person rushed through the water like an arrow from a string. The speed of movement in the water is faster than that of a swordfish. This is the horror of the SERA template. The ability to see through the laws of operation of all things can automatically optimize and upgrade the acquired variant abilities. One-click full level, like using an arm. That is why, after Brian obtained the survival of the fittest ability, his variant ability level has been automatically upgraded to level 5. Yes. After plundering Darwin's variant ability, Brian jumped from an ordinary mutant without ability to a powerful level 5 mutant. In the water, Brian clenched his fists slightly. He could feel that his body was still undergoing adaptive evolution. It's not survival of the fittest, but adaptive evolution. His body can adapt to various extreme environments and continue to evolve. This adaptive evolution will not stop until he evolves into the most perfect creature in the current environment. I can feel that nothing can kill me except time. Brian jumped out of the water, as agile as a carp. When Brian landed on the shore, all the adaptive evolution organs on his body disappeared rapidly. It's a pity that this adaptive evolution will disappear if it is out of the extreme environment. After taking a look at his body, Brian shook his head helplessly. He turned his head to look at Darwin on the shore. At this moment, Darwin was dying, but he was still not completely dead. It must be said that the survival of the fittest gave Darwin a strong vitality. I will carry forward your ability, you can rest in peace. Brian looked down at Darwin, then raised his hand and shot Darwin in the exposed brain. The bullet hit Darwin's brain's ability center accurately, directly destroying Darwin's mutant ability. Darwin's eyes widened, and he couldn't die anymore. Have fun reading every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 5 Level 5 Mutant Brian, Adapting to Evolution. Number 233, Brooklyn, a low 2-story building. This is Brian's home, and it is also the only legacy left by Brian's parents besides the watch shop. In the living room on the first floor, Brian held a cup of coffee in one hand. In the other hand, he held an old-looking lighter and casually set his blood-stained clothes on fire. Boom! In just a moment, the flames of the burning clothes enveloped Brian's whole body. However, Brian did not feel any discomfort. On the contrary, his body was rapidly adapting and evolving. In just a moment, Brian, who was originally a flesh and blood body, had turned into a silver-white metal man. At this moment, Brian was like the Silver Surfer in the Fantastic Four movie. When the flame disappeared, Brian turned back into a flesh and blood body. The flame did not leave a single bit of damage on his body. This is the level 5 mutant ability, the power of adaptive evolution. Brian can adapt to any extreme environment. Not to mention this little flame, even if he was thrown onto the surface of the sun, he would be safe and sound. Not just the flame. In the 2 hours after returning home, Brian conducted a comprehensive test of the adaptive evolution ability. His current body is immune to cold, heat, electricity, radiation, poison, disease, physical blows, and energy attacks. According to Brian's test, his current body can even produce mental resistance. Except for not being immune to aging, his current body is almost a replica of the eternal Titan body of Marvel boss Thanos. Unlike Darwin's first-level mutant ability, which can only survive in a single extreme environment. The adaptive evolution that has grown into a level 5 mutant ability allows Brian to adapt to multiple complex extreme environments at the same time. This also makes Brian almost free of weaknesses. The only thing that bothers Brian is that adaptive evolution is a passive ability. He cannot actively control it, and the direction of evolution is completely random. This requires Brian to adapt to the situation after adaptive evolution. I am a level 5 mutant. Brian felt his body and smiled. Yesterday, he was just an unknown mutant. And only one day later, he has already stood at the top of mutant. He became a level 5 mutant with the same level as Professor X and Magneto. Oh, by the way, at this point in time, only Black Emperor Shao is a level 5 mutant. Professor X and Magneto are only level 4 and level 3 mutants. After taking a sip of coffee, Brian began to think about the next plan. There is no doubt that at this point in time, the first battle of mutant has just begun. Professor X Charles Xavier has just become a university professor. And Magneto Eric Lencher is hunting down his life mentor, level 5 mutant Black Emperor Shao, all over the world. And the only level 5 mutant Shao is deliberately trying to provoke World War III. So that the world will suffer a nuclear baptism, hoping to use nuclear radiation to activate the X gene hidden in humans and change the world into a mutant world. Speaking of which, my current body should be able to withstand a nuclear explosion and be safe and sound. Brian touched his chin and couldn't help muttering. He once again discovered an advantage of adaptive evolution, that is, being able to withstand nuclear explosions. The only one who can do this is Wolverine Logan, the son of Destiny in the mutant universe. After recalling the plot of the first battle of mutant, Brian also knew how to successfully join Professor X's team. The easiest way is to go directly to Oxford University, the Eagle Sauce. Professor X has just become a professor of genetics at Oxford University. You only need to ask around to find Professor X. If you can pass Professor X's mind-reading test, you can naturally join Professor X's team. However, it is obvious that Brian, who just killed a fellow mutant, will definitely not pass Professor X's test. Professor X during this period of time did not have any principle of not using telepathy ability on people without permission. On the contrary, Professor X during this period abused his ability without any bottom line and used his telepathy to invade other people's brains at will. Professor X used his ability to read all of Magneto's memories as soon as he met Magneto. And he used his ability to make Magneto temporarily give up the pursuit of Black Emperor Shao. Brian didn't want his memories to be read by Professor X at will. Although the ability of adaptive evolution has a certain mental resistance. But he is not sure whether the mental resistance brought by adaptive evolution can resist Professor X's telepathy. Therefore, before contacting Professor X, Brian still needs to make sure that his adaptive evolution ability can allow him to resist mental attacks. Brian tapped the table lightly with his fingers and determined his next target. Moira McMaggot. Yes, Brian decided to use CIA fringe agent Moira McMaggot as a breakthrough. The cause of the first battle of mutant was that Agent Moira discovered the existence of mutant in the Hellfire Club in Las Vegas. So he began to seek the help of Professor X Charles Xavier. And if you want to contact Agent Moira, the best place is definitely the Hellfire Club in Las Vegas. Brian glanced at the time. It was 8:15 in the morning. There was a direct flight to Las Vegas about to take off. Now that the target had been determined, Brian would not waste any more time. He simply packed his luggage, took the necessary documents and M1911 pistol, and then came to the balcony on the second floor. After looking at the ground below, Brian jumped directly from the balcony on the second floor without any hesitation. Bang! The next second, Brian had already hit the ground heavily. Brian was unharmed after jumping from a height of several meters. When he fell, his feet had adapted and evolved into cat-like pads. The pads offset the gravity and impact of the fall for Brian. The ability to adapt to evolution, although the combat ability is lacking. But in terms of survival ability, even Wolverine, who has a super strong self-healing factor, cannot be compared with Brian. Brian found a taxi and took it to Brooklyn Airport. Half an hour later, Brian boarded a flight to Las Vegas, Nevada. Mutants First Battle, Here I Come. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 6, Hundreds of Killers. Brian, Mind Shield, charged at White Queen Emma. Las Vegas, Nevada. This is the entertainment capital of the world, a real den of money. It has the most complete entertainment venues in the world, with various casinos and brothels in every corner. This is a paradise for men. At this moment, Hellfire Club. Outside a luxurious private room, a group of girls, almost naked, are waiting in line outside the door. These girls are paid dancers of Hellfire Club. They are usually arranged to receive government officials and politicians who come here for entertainment. However, now these girls are turning a blind eye to the politicians and officials in Hellfire Club. Instead, they look at the door in front of them with fiery eyes. Everyone is like a pilgrimage. Next. Just as these girls were waiting, a low and magnetic male voice suddenly came from the room. Then the door in front of them opened, and a girl walked out holding the door. "Brian, you are really great." She looked back at the door behind her every 3 steps, and she was very reluctant to leave. Hundreds of people killed, Brian has done it. After the girl left, the girls who were waiting cheered excitedly, and these girls couldn't wait to compete for the next spot. Some girls even fought for this. The whole Hellfire Club hall was in chaos. In the room, Brian was lying on the bed, drinking coffee leisurely. 3 days have passed since Brian came to the Hellfire Club. During these 3 days, he has been looking for Agent Mora. But he found nothing. Brian had no choice but to come to the Hellfire Club to have fun while waiting for Agent Mora to appear. It has to be said that the Hellfire Club is really a man's paradise. As long as you have money, you can enjoy any service here. And Brian followed the local customs and enjoyed the treatment of Homelander. "I can do whatever I want." While communicating with the young lady, Brian once again discovered an absolute advantage of adaptive evolution. Brian found that he would perfectly adapt to any woman. This is simply the ability that men dream of. Rubber fruit, rubber man, are nothing in front of Brian. With this ability, Brian doesn't need to rest at all. He spent 3 days to finally achieve the achievement of killing 100 people. And Brian has become a godlike existence to these girls. Buzz. Just when the girls outside were in a mess, an invisible spiritual power enveloped the girls. The girl who was originally enthusiastic suddenly became dull. All the girls seemed to have pressed the freeze button. Click, click. While these girls were frozen, Brian in the room heard the click of mechanical gears in his mind at the same time. Brian, who was originally lying on the bed, turned over instantly. This is Brian's variant ability, which sees through the laws of operation of all things and warns. There are mutants nearby, and they are just outside the door. Just when Brian was alert to the mutants outside the door, Brian's door was pushed open. A blonde woman in a beautiful and sexy white pleated skirt caught Brian's eyes. This woman was like a ripe peach, exuding sexiness and charm, as well as the elegant atmosphere of European aristocrats. Her figure was especially amazing. Based on Brian's eyes of killing hundreds of people just now, this woman could be called a sexy stunner. White Queen, Emma Frost. Brian guessed her identity the moment he saw this woman. This woman was the White Queen of Hellfire Club, Emma Frost. Level 4 Mind Mutant. "Do you know me?" White Queen Emma, who had just entered the room, was stunned when Brian called out her name, and then looked at Brian with interest. The reason why she came here was that she heard that a mysterious and powerful man had come to the Hellfire Club. This mysterious man almost made all the women in the Hellfire Club crazy. In just 3 days since he came to the Hellfire Club, he had already achieved the achievement of killing 100 people, and every woman who had communicated with him was extremely satisfied. It was a double satisfaction of body and mind. This made White Queen Emma, as a woman, have a strong interest in this mysterious man named Brian. If the rumors are true, Brian can bring the ultimate experience to any woman, then White Queen Emma wants to try it. That is why, when Black Emperor Shao was preparing to receive Colonel Henry, the representative of the American military, Emma took a break from her busy schedule and came to Brian. What surprised Emma was that the Asian man in front of him, named Brian, actually called out his code name in mutant. This made Emma even more curious about Brian. White Queen Emma, a level 4 psychic mutant. It has two variant abilities. One is the telepathy ability. The other is the diamond ability. Face to face Emma's gaze, Brian calmly said her variant ability. As Brian spoke, Emma, who originally had an elegant smile, suddenly became serious. Mutant. Emma looked at Brian carefully. She was very sure that Brian was her mutant. This made Emma cautious. She raised her right hand and pressed 2 fingers on her temple. The power of telepathy was released. Just when Emma used her psychic power to read Brian's consciousness, a sharp sound suddenly came from her brain. This sharp sound seriously interfered with Emma's telepathy ability. She could not hear any of Brian's thoughts, nor could she connect to Brian's psychic consciousness. Emma's telepathy failed. Psychic shielding? Emma frowned and said with some surprise. Seeing Emma in pain, Brian smiled. As Emma said, his brain evolved the ability to shield his mind the moment it was attacked. His brain would constantly release a special mind frequency. This mind frequency, like a jammer, constantly interfered with Emma's mind reading. Under the interference of this mind frequency, not to mention Emma, even Professor X, who used the brain enhancer, could not read his thoughts. This wave is stable. As early as when he met Emma, Brian was ready to test his mind resistance. After all, Emma and Professor X have completely different ideas. Even if she really read the whole process of Brian killing Darwin from Brian's brain, she would not shout and kill Brian because of this. This is the affinity from the villain. That's why Brian deliberately exposed his identity as a mutant and told Emma's information to lure her to use the telepathy ability on him. And now it seems that Brian's adaptive evolution ability is very effective. Even attacks on the spiritual level can adapt and evolve corresponding resistance mechanisms. Under Emma's vigilant gaze, Brian walked towards Emma step by step. As Brian approached, Emma's body suddenly turned into diamond. The sparkling diamond light made Emma's body even more dazzling. "Emma, sweetheart, do you want to experience my mutant ability?" Brian looked at Emma's crystal-clear body with fiery eyes and said with a smile on his face. "What is your mutant ability?" Emma asked curiously. "I can adapt to any woman, including your current diamond body." Brian's words made Emma's heart move. "Really?" She gently lifted Brian's bathrobe with her fingers, and then her eyes widened instantly. Under Emma's gaze, a part of Brian's flesh and blood body instantly turned into a shining diamond. "Brian, this is really great, you are simply God's favorite." Emma saw such a shocking scene, and immediately hugged Brian with both hands, exclaiming in amazement. "Emma, sweetheart, I will make you unforgettable for life. P.S. Please collect the new book, please give flowers, please comment, please support in any way. Reading is fun every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 7 Brian's shadow form finds Maura McMaggot. 4 hours later. White Queen Emma walked out of Brian's room weakly. Just as Brian said, in these 4 hours, he brought Emma an unforgettable experience. The two tried various methods in these 4 hours. And because Emma has two physical states, so, compared with ordinary women, Emma has a dual experience. This also gave her two different pleasures. This is a feeling she has never had before. Moreover, Emma is a level 4 mind mutant. She can enter her memory anytime and anywhere, and experience this 4-hour battle through her mind. The dual feeling of body and mind. It makes Emma feel like ascending to heaven. It also allows her to engrave Brian's mark into the deepest part of her mind. From this moment on, Hellfire Club's White Queen Emma will never forget Brian. Unless it is with Brian. Otherwise, she will no longer have any sexual interest in other men. In the room, Brian looked at the messy battlefield with a smile on his face. Emma in her normal state is gentle and charming. Emma in her diamond state is wild and very durable. This makes the fight between the two very crazy. They have tried more than 10 times the moves that appeared in various short movies and those that have not appeared before. That is to say, Brian is adaptable and can adapt to everything. If it were any other man, he would probably be dying now. It was a really exciting fight. Brian dressed neatly, took out a cigar from his pocket, lit it, and then exhaled a puff of smoke, looking comfortable. He made White Queen Emma happy physically and mentally. And now, it's time to get down to business. Find CIA agent Maura McMaggot, and then join Professor X's Superboy team. Brian walked out of the room, and the girls around him looked at him with fiery eyes. Having achieved the achievement of killing 100 people, Brian has become a celebrity in the Hellfire Club. Not only these girls, but even some congressmen and high-ranking officials know about Brian's existence. Hey, Brian, you're amazing. What's the secret? Is this the one who killed 100 people? It's okay that he has strong abilities, but he's also so handsome, damn it. In the dance floor, the men who knew Brian raised their glasses to Brian frequently. Some even approached Brian quietly, asking him about the secret of Brian's strength. Secret? You weaklings, I'm just gifted with abilities. Under the gaze of everyone, Brian said lightly. F***K. A group of expectant men suddenly felt offended and cursed at Brian. Ignoring these people, Brian whistled and walked out of the Hellfire Club. Is it 10 o'clock in the evening now? Brian raised his left hand and looked at the time on his watch. He had fought with Emma so hard before that it was already night before he noticed it. He looked around and then locked his eyes on a black Lincoln car. In fact, as early as when he was communicating with Emma, he used the game method to let Emma help him find the location of Agent Maura. Now, Maura McMaggot is in this black Lincoln car, and her CIA partner is monitoring the every move of some members of the Hellfire Club. Brian walked into the darkness, and in the dark environment, his body automatically adapted to the new ability. This time, Brian not only adapted to the night vision ability, but also the darkness made his skin evolve rapidly, allowing him to absorb the surrounding light. This makes his body in darkness perfectly integrated, just like the Shadow Man in Conan. Can perfectly hide himself in the dark. Unless he takes the initiative to speak, others can't see him even if they are face to face with him. Under the light, there is only a human outline. He walked slowly to the window of the black Lincoln car, and then raised his hand and knocked on the window. Dong dong dong. Inside the black Lincoln, CIA agent James and CIA agent Maura McMaggot were observing the Hellfire Club intently, recording the politicians and high-ranking officials who came in and out. The sudden knock startled the two. Maura was the first to react, then unzipped her clothes, deliberately making herself look naked. Then she gestured to Agent James beside her. Agent James nodded, then slowly opened the car window a crack. Maura looked out through the gap, but did not find the person who was talking. In her eyes, there was only the thick and dark night. Maura was stunned for a moment, and then signaled Agent James to open all the windows. Through the open window, Maura turned her head and looked around, but still did not find the person who had just spoken. This made Maura frown. James, turn on the lights. Looking at the dark environment around her, Maura made the most correct judgment. Agent James quickly turned on the lights at Maura's command. Click. However, Agent James had just turned on the lights when the door of the cab was opened. Before Agent James could react, a strong force directly hit his head on the steering wheel. The violent impact made Agent James lose consciousness with only a muffled groan. F***K. Looking at his unconscious partner, Maura burst into a swear word, then directly pulled out a pistol from his arms and pointed the muzzle in the direction of the cab. Then Maura's eyes widened in shock. Don't eat the sour radish, what is this? A black shadow man? Maura looked at the direction of the cab in astonishment, and she couldn't believe her eyes. She actually saw a dark human silhouette. It was like a black shadow. Only the eyes and mouth were white, and it looked very surprised. Maura, who had never seen such a situation, was stunned. The one who stood in the cab and knocked Agent James unconscious was definitely Brian. Because the car lights were turned on, Brian's body was exposed to the light, which gradually made his body emerge with a human silhouette. Looking at Mora, who was stunned, Brian raised his hands very cooperatively. "Agent Mora, don't get excited, I have no ill will towards you." Brian's gentle words greatly soothed Mora's shocked heart and temporarily restored her thinking ability. "Who are you, what are you going to do, and why did you attack my partner?" Mora held the gun in both hands, the muzzle was always pointed at Brian, and asked loudly. "Agent Mora, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brian Kent, and I'm a mutant. I'm here to seek cooperation. I'm sorry about your partner. This is just my self-protection. I don't trust any CIA agent except you." Brian apologized to Mora with an apologetic look on his face, but what he said made Mora frown. Mutant? It was the first time Mora heard the name of mutant. She looked at Brian's black shadow body blankly, and had no idea what mutant meant. "You can understand that we are a group of human gene evolutionists with abilities. We call ourselves mutants." Brian explained the concept of mutant in a concise manner. Although Brian had explained the concept of mutant, Mora still had only a vague understanding. Compared to mutant, she cared more about Brian's purpose. "Mr. Brian, what is the cooperation you just mentioned? Why did you look for me?" Faced with Mora's suspicious questioning, Brian said the words he had already thought of. "Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shao killed Darwin." Brian's voice was full of pain and hatred, and Mora had some guesses. "Darwin?" Although he had guesses, Mora still asked. "Yes, Darwin. He is also a mutant. He is also my brother and beloved relative. But Black Emperor Shao killed him cruelly. As his brother, I want to kill Shao myself and avenge Darwin bro. However, with my own strength, I can't kill Shao at all. So, I found you. Agent Mora. P.S. The first update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and beg for a wave of support. Have fun reading every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 8 Level 4 Precognition Mutant Darwin, Mora was fooled. In the darkness, in front of a black Lincoln. Brian, in the form of a black shadow, was leaning against the headlights. Next to Brian, was Mora, who was staring at Brian with a vigilant look. "Who is the Black Emperor Shao you just mentioned?" Mora frowned and asked. "The Black Emperor Shao is the controller of the Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw. The Black Emperor is his title of mutant." Brian knew everything and said everything. In fact, he was gaining Mora's trust in this way. After all, sincerity is always a sure-win move. It is also the cornerstone of gaining trust. Sebastian Shaw is a mutant? Mora, who had been tracking the Hellfire Club, frowned when she learned that the Black Emperor Shao was a mutant. If it is true as Brian said, Sebastian Shaw of the Hellfire Club is a mutant. Then, as a CIA agent, she needs to report this matter to the CIA top brass. Yes, Agent Mora. Black Emperor Shao is not only a mutant, but also the only level 5 mutant in the world. Brian's words made Mora frown again. Is a level 5 mutant very strong? Mora didn't know the classification of mutants, so he didn't know the concept of level 5 mutants. Level 5 mutants can already ignore most thermal weapons. And Black Emperor Shao can even withstand nuclear bombardment without dying. Brian didn't exaggerate Black Emperor Shao's ability. In fact, this is true. Black Emperor Shao has an Omega-level variant ability that can absorb all energy. This includes nuclear explosion energy and nuclear radiation. He will not die if he does not exceed the limit of Black Emperor Shao's energy absorbing. According to the plot of the first battle of Mutant, Black Emperor Shao can perfectly absorb the power of the nuclear reactor, which is enough to show that Black Emperor Shao can withstand a nuclear bomb. But that's all. If there are more, Black Emperor Shao's body will be overloaded, and then explode and die. Holy shit, a level 5 mutant is so powerful. When Mora learned that Black Emperor Shao could withstand a nuclear bomb, she was shocked. At the same time, she also understood why Brian wanted to find her and seek cooperation. It was really that Black Emperor Shao was too strong. Mr. Brian, what level of mutant are you, and what is your ability? Why do you want to cooperate with me? After Brian's sincere nirvana, Mora has established initial trust in Brian. Mora, as you can see, I am just a level 3 mutant. My awakening ability is called Survival of the Fittest. I can adapt to some special environments, just like now, my Shadow Man state is to adapt to the darkness. Brian shrugged, showed Mora his Shadow Man body, and then continued. And the reason I found you is because of Darwin's ability. My brother Darwin is a powerful level 4 prophecy mutant. He has the ability to predict the future. Yes, Brian is going to make the dead Darwin into a rare predictor ability. In this way, Brian can freely show his advantage of plot prediction. Darwin is dead anyway. There is no evidence. Brian said he is a level 4 prediction mutant, and he is a level 4 prediction mutant. Even Brian just doesn't have time now. If he has time, he wants to draw the plot of the first battle of mutant to serve as evidence of Darwin's prediction of the future. The ability to predict the future? Mora looked at Brian in disbelief, obviously shocked by Darwin's prediction of the future. Yes, Darwin bro is a prophet. As early as 3 months ago, he had predicted that an unprecedented nuclear disaster would sweep the world. Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shah is plotting to let the American military deploy nuclear bombs in Cuba. Once Black Emperor Shah's plan is completed, nuclear war will be inevitable, and mankind will usher in an unprecedented nuclear disaster. My brother Darwin foresaw a cruel future. That's why he was ready to save the world alone. But as a predictor, Darwin's fighting power is not comparable to that of the mutant of the Hellfire Club. Before stopping Black Emperor Shao, Darwin recorded all the major events he predicted in the future and gave them to me. And you, my friend Mora, you will be the key person to start the first major event, and you are kind, brave and trustworthy in Darwin's prediction. That's why I found you. Brian told Mora in advance the plot he knew with the help of Darwin's prediction ability. When Mora heard that Black Emperor Shao wanted to provoke a nuclear war, her heart was in turmoil. Definitely, Mora would not listen to Brian's one-sided words, she still needed to verify Brian's words. I need to verify what you said in person. Mora took a deep breath, calmed down her mood, and then said calmly. Definitely, Mora. You will be verified. Darwin has predicted everything. Tonight, you will get important information, and you will have enough trust in me. Brian nodded, then approached Mora and said very sincerely. Since it is a cooperation, you should also show your appearance. Looking at Brian, who only had a human outline, Mora said with some dissatisfaction. In fact, my ability has some defects. I can't control the ability autonomously, and my body will automatically adapt to the surrounding environment. Moreover, when adapting to survival, I will uncontrollably produce the desire to reproduce. This is definitely Brian's lie. The reason for saying this is, on the one hand, to create a defect in Mora's ability, so as to lower Mora's psychological defense line. On the other hand, it is because Brian really wants to have a deep communication with Mora. While Brian was talking, his right hand had already dishonestly taken off Mora's messy clothes. Please forgive me, Mora. In the midst of Mora's astonishment, Brian threw her to the ground. Before Mora could react, the two had already started an in-depth conversation. 2 hours later. Brian, who had recovered his normal body, stood up and looked at Mora with an apologetic face. I'm sorry, Mora. Beside Brian, Mora was putting on her clothes. After hearing Brian's apology, she looked at Brian's face with a complicated look. Look at it this way, you are still very handsome. If it is a defect in your ability, I forgive you, Brian. Besides, the feeling just now was really great, and I was very satisfied. So, you don't need to blame yourself so much. Mora forgave Brian very readily. Not only because Brian is handsome, but also because this experience made her unforgettable for the rest of her life. Okay, now it's time to verify what you said, Brian. After putting on her clothes again, Mora turned back into a capable CIA agent. She turned her eyes to the Hellfire Club. Just as Mora was communicating with Brian, in front of the Hellfire Club, White Queen Emma was receiving several senior American officials. "Colonel Henry, I am Emma Frost, Sebastian Shaw's partner." At this moment, White Queen Emma elegantly introduced herself to Colonel Henry, who was invited this time. "Where is Shaw? Why doesn't he come?" Colonel Henry looked at White Queen Emma, and then asked with a vigilant face. "Relax a little, Colonel Henry, you will see Shaw." White Queen Emma slightly focused, and the power of her mind instantly relaxed the vigilant Colonel Henry. "You are right, Ms. Emma. I should relax a little." Colonel Henry's expression relaxed, and he walked directly into the Hellfire Club. Brian looked at the familiar scene in front of him, and a smile appeared on his face. He knew that the plot had begun. P.S. The second update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please rate it, please give flowers, please comment, please support it. Have fun reading every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 9, Mutants of Hellfire Club. In front of the Hellfire Club, Mora walked back with a somewhat ugly face. Just now, after seeing Colonel Henry, the representative of the American military, appear in the Hellfire Club, Mora wanted to follow him. But as the top club in Las Vegas, the Hellfire Club is a membership system. Mora, a CIA agent, obviously did not have the money to apply for a membership. So, she was stopped outside the door. As for the original plot, disguised as a dancer and easily mixed in? Just kidding, this is the base camp of the Black Emperor Shao. How could it be so easy to mix in? Especially with a spiritual mutant like White Queen Emma. "Let's go, Mora. I'll take you in." Looking at Mora, who returned in vain, Brian smiled, and the time to show off had come. Then he directly pulled Mora's right hand and led Mora to the door of the Hellfire Club. "Mr. Brian, please come in." The security guard at the door smiled in admiration after seeing Brian, and personally led Brian into the Hellfire Club. Brian's celebrity effect of killing hundreds of people alone is definitely not enough to make the security guard so flattering. It's just because Brian is now a permanent member of the Hellfire Club. This is a gift from White Queen Emma. Entering the Hellfire Club so easily made Mora a little suspicious of Brian. Facing Mora's doubts, Brian explained slowly. "Mora, you should have experienced that my ability can adapt to size. Not only men come here, but also some ladies come here to find happiness. I just happen to be able to satisfy these ladies. Membership of the Hellfire Club is a generous gift from a beautiful lady." Brian's explanation made Mora roll his eyes at him with some contempt. Mora did not doubt Brian's words. Because what Brian said was true, he could really bring women the ultimate satisfaction. "Brian, you come and find a way to attract attention. I'm going to look for Colonel Henry, who just entered the private room." After entering the Hellfire Club, Mora gave Brian an order and then blended into the crowd. Faced with Mora's order, Brian followed it without hesitation. "Hey, girls, your god is back." Brian opened his arms like a king returning from a triumphant victory. And the girls who were dancing with the men, after hearing Brian's words, immediately abandoned their dance partners and threw themselves into Brian's arms. "Oh my God, Brian is here. Brian is back. This time I must experience the taste of killing 100 people, and no one of you can compete with me." In the blink of an eye, Brian was surrounded by a group of beautiful women. Mora, who was looking for Colonel Henry's location, saw the scene in front of him, raised his eyebrows and gave Brian a thumbs up. Then, with his extraordinary agent ability, Mora successfully found the private room where Colonel Henry was, and triggered the mechanism to come to the back of the private room, a secret room. As soon as he came to the room, Mora heard the conversation coming from behind the bookshelf. Mora approached the bookshelf and saw the reception room behind the bookshelf through the gap of the bookshelf. At this moment, in the reception room, Black Emperor Shao was sitting leisurely in front of the sofa, gently shaking the goblet. Next to Black Emperor Shao was White Queen Emma. "Colonel Henry, I need you to place the Jupiter nuclear bomb in Cuba." Black Emperor Shao glanced at Colonel Henry opposite and said leisurely. F***K, Shao. You are simply a lunatic. Do you want me to become a sinner of mankind? If so, our cooperation ends here. Hearing what Black Emperor Shao said, Colonel Henry stood up with a face full of anger. Although he had a deal with Black Emperor Shao, he would not become the sinner who provoked World War III for this. Looking at Colonel Henry standing up, Black Emperor Shao smiled, and then gestured to Jiliu beside him. Jiliu stood up with a cold face and raised his hands. In his palms, 2 tornadoes grew from small to large, and then were thrown on the table by Jiliu. Holy shit, Shao, what did you add to my drink? Seeing the tornado raging in front of him, Colonel Henry was confused. He thought he must have drunk something that could cause hallucinations. But then he was swept up by the tornado and hit the wall heavily. Colonel Henry, you only have 2 choices now. Obey my orders and place the Jupiter nuclear bomb in Cuba. Or die. Black Emperor Shao stood up with a glass of wine, looking down at Colonel Henry, giving Colonel Henry only 2 choices. What are you? Colonel Henry, who collapsed to the ground, looked at Black Emperor Shao in horror and asked loudly. As you can see, we are mutants. We are the evolvers of mankind. Colonel Henry, the world is about to undergo unprecedented changes. Human beings, such low-level creatures, will evolve in a nuclear explosion and become one of us. Black Emperor Shao spoke of his grand plan without hesitation. This made Mora, who was hiding behind the bookshelf and secretly observing, instantly realized that what Brian said was true. Black Emperor Shao is not just a mutant. And his purpose is really to provoke a nuclear war. Brian didn't lie to me, he is trustworthy. Mora took a deep breath and continued to observe. As White Queen Emma showed her telepathy ability, the terrified Colonel Henry could no longer hold on. Shao, our cooperation will continue, I will complete your orders very well. Colonel Henry decisively chose to surrender. Just kidding, compared to his own life, being a sinner of mankind is nothing. Moreover, if what Black Emperor Shao said is true, then maybe after the outbreak of the nuclear war, he will also evolve and become a mutant who has awakened the mutant ability. At that time, he will not only not be a sinner, but even the Messiah who opens the mutant era. A true hero. Emma. Facing Colonel Henry's surrender, Black Emperor Shao did not express anything, he turned his head and looked at White Queen Emma. At the signal of Black Emperor Shao, Emma used telepathy ability to invade Colonel Henry's brain. Then he nodded gently to Black Emperor Shao. Welcome to the Hellfire Club, Colonel Henry. Until he was sure that Colonel Henry was truly surrendering, Black Emperor Shao smiled and reached out to pull Colonel Henry up. The summit is about to begin. Emma, notify Red Devil and ask him to send Colonel Henry to the summit. Under Black Emperor Zhao's order, White Queen Emma blew a whistle, and a red mist instantly appeared beside Emma. It was the level 4 mutant of the Hellfire Club. Red Devil Azazo. His ability teleportation is enough to cover the distance of half the Earth. Under Mora's shocked gaze, Red Devil directly grabbed Colonel Henry and disappeared here. Shao, a rat sneaked in here. After everything was over, White Queen Emma glanced in Mora's direction and then reminded. Who is it? Black Emperor Shao frowned and asked. A CIA agent. Emma put her right hand on her temple and easily read Mora's information. Emma, take care of her. His plan was about to be completed, which made Black Emperor Shao in a good mood, so he did not take Mora who sneaked in seriously. Just a CIA agent, just leave it to Emma. Azazo, take me to Cuba. Black Emperor Shao did not care about Mora, what he really cared about was the smooth start of the nuclear war. Bang! A red mist appeared again. In the red mist, the Red Devil grabbed Black Emperor Zhao's shoulder, and then disappeared with a teleport. The entire Hellfire Club, only the 4th level Mind Mutant Emma was left. P.S. The 3rd update is here, please support the new book, please collect, please evaluate, please flowers, please comment, please support. Have fun reading every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 10 White Queen Emma's Mind Control, Mora's Approval. In the living room. Mora opened her mouth wide, shocked by the mutant she had seen before. Compared to Brian's Shadowman state, which seemed to be more of an auxiliary. The mutants of the Hellfire Club have mutant abilities that seem very powerful. Whether it's the tornado of the rapids, or the teleportation of the Red Devil, even the telepathy and diamondization of White Queen Emma. They are all very powerful and perverted abilities. Now Mora finally completely understood why Brian wanted to cooperate with her. I'm going to leave here and report the intelligence and plan of Black Emperor Shao to the top of the CIA. Seeing that Black Emperor Shao had disappeared, Mora was ready to leave here. However, just as Mora was about to leave, a voice suddenly sounded in her mind. Mora McMaggot. The sudden voice scared Mora. Who's talking? Just as Mora was suspicious, the bookshelf in front of her opened, and then Emma walked out of it. Is it you, the psychic mutant? When Mora saw Emma for the first time, he realized that the voice in his mind was Emma's telepathy ability. As a CIA agent, Mora reacted very quickly. When he saw Emma for the first time, he took out his gun and shot. Bang, bang, bang. Bursts of dull gunshots rang out in the small private room. Facing a powerful mutant, Mora emptied the magazine without any hesitation. Ding, ding, ding. Facing Mora's shooting, Emma just casually transformed her body into a diamond form. The sparkling diamond skin blocked all the bullets. F*****KU. Looking at Emma's diamond body, Mora cursed, then turned around and ran. Stop. Before running a few steps, Mora heard Emma's psychic voice again in his mind. Emma's psychic voice seemed to be some kind of supreme command, which made Mora's consciousness obey unconditionally. Her body was still running, but it had stopped. When Mora came back to her senses, she was shocked to find that her consciousness seemed to be separated from her body, and she could not control her body. She could not even speak. Come here. Emma's voice in her heart sounded again, and Mora turned around and walked towards Emma. Emma looked at Mora with cold eyes. The ability of telepathy is not only able to read minds and invade brains. Similarly, it can also make conscious creatures obey the conscious instructions of the telepathist. It can even directly erase other people's consciousness through the mind level. However, dealing with a CIA agent would not make Emma spend energy to erase her consciousness. Point the gun at yourself. Facing Emma's ability to do what she wants, Mora had no power to resist. She mechanically changed the magazine for her pistol, then raised her right hand and pointed the gun at her temple. Pull the trigger. Emma gave the final order. Mora's eyes were full of fear and despair, but the index finger of her right hand began to slowly pull the trigger. Just when Mora thought she was going to die, an arm suddenly stretched out from behind and grabbed Mora's gun. The one who blocked Mora's gun was Brian. As early as the first time Mora shot Emma, Brian followed the sound of the gun and found this place. As soon as he came here, he saw Mora about to shoot himself under Emma's mental ability. Brian definitely wouldn't let Mora die. After all, he still needed Mora to endorse him in order to gain Professor X's trust. Bang! A dull gunshot sounded. The bullet hit Brian's palm, and his adaptive evolution was also passively activated, and the palm of his right hand suddenly evolved into metal skin. The bullet did not cause any harm to Brian. Until this time, Mora came back to her senses. She looked at Brian with gratitude. The life-saving grace made her no longer have any doubts about Brian. At this moment, Brian's image in Mora's heart quickly rose, and he became a trustworthy mutant companion. Seeing Mora's eyes of approval, Brian smiled. The efforts just now were not in vain. Then Brian looked up at Emma and nodded to Emma. Emma, thank you for saving Mora's life. Emma smiled at Brian elegantly. Brian, are you really going to be an enemy of Black Emperor Shao? As a psychic mutant, Emma had already used psychic power to read Mora's memory. That's why Emma knew the relationship between Mora and Brian. In view of the unforgettable deep communication with Brian before, Emma did not kill Mora. Otherwise, with Emma's powerful level 4 psychic mutant Mora alone, there is no need to be so troublesome. In fact, Emma has been waiting for Brian. She wanted to ask about the level 4 mutant Darwin that she saw in Mora's memory. After all, in any world, prophets are very rare. Yes, Emma. You know, Black Emperor Shao killed my mutant brother Darwin. Brian shrugged and said nonsense. Emma frowned slightly. The relationship between the mutants of the Hellfire Club and Black Emperor Shao was not that of superiors and subordinates, but that of collaborators who were in the same group for warmth. That is why Emma did not know whether Black Emperor Shao had really killed a fellow mutant named Darwin. She did not care about these. What she really cared about was just the future events that Brian mentioned. She wanted to know whether Black Emperor Zhao's plan could succeed. Is the human race after the nuclear explosion really the era of mutants as Black Emperor Shao said? What does the future that Darwin predicted look like? Emma asked with some trepidation. The reason she followed Black Emperor Shao was because he painted a big pie for her. Black Emperor Shao wants to create a world with only mutants. That is why Emma, who is also a mutant, follows Black Emperor Shao. It was a disaster, a double disaster for humans and mutants. The nuclear radiation produced by the nuclear explosion can indeed activate the mutant genes in humans. But at the same time, nuclear radiation will also kill 99% of the mutants in the world. In the whole world, only 3 mutants can survive. Brian did not lie this time. It can only be said that Black Emperor Shao suffered from his lack of education. He miscalculated the damage caused by nuclear radiation to the human body. Or, because of his own mutant ability, he subconsciously ignored the harm of nuclear radiation. 99.9% of mutants cannot resist the damage of nuclear radiation and die miserably. Which 3 people? Emma asked subconsciously. Black Emperor Shao, Wolverine Logan. And Jean Grey, who has not yet been born. Brian did not say that he could also withstand the nuclear explosion, which was one of his trump cards. Hearing Brian's words, Emma was silent. After all, this is 1962. Although the power of nuclear bombs has been verified in the island country, the harm of nuclear radiation is still unknown. So when she heard Brian say that only 3 people in the world could survive, Emma began to waver from her original belief in Black Emperor Zhao's plan. Take your little lover away from here. Don't think about revenge for your brother Darwin. Black Emperor Shao is more powerful than you can imagine. Emma looked at Brian deeply, and then said coldly. Black Emperor Shao is indeed very powerful, but not invincible. And I have already learned the way to defeat Black Emperor Shao from Darwin's prophecy. Brian looked at Emma calmly, and then pulled the confused Mora away from the Hellfire Club. P.S. The 4th update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and please support it. Have fun reading books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 11 Brian's Prophecy comic is fresh out of the oven, young Professor X. Why did that mind mutant let us go? On the flight to Oxford University in Eagle Country, Mora was still a little shocked. She looked at Brian, who was staring at the sea of clouds outside the plane, and asked her most puzzled question. Because I made her happy, and more than once. Brian's answer was concise and to the point. Mora was stunned for a moment, but she was unable to refute. Brian, you are really a B******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* silence, Mora couldn't help but give Brian a middle finger. "Thank you for the compliment." Facing Mora's middle finger, Brian didn't care. "Brian, can Professor X in Darwin's prophecy really help us defeat Black Emperor Shao?" Mora asked again with a worried face. As early as after Brian and Mora left the Hellfire Club. Mora, who had already believed in Brian, asked Brian how to defeat Black Emperor Shao. And Brian didn't hide anything, and told Mora all the information about Professor X with the help of Darwin's prophecy. And told Mora that this was the only way Darwin could defeat Black Emperor Shao among the 14 million futures he observed with his prophetic ability. Mora believed it, so she immediately booked a flight to Oxford University. According to Darwin's prediction, Professor X is the future leader of Mutant. He will definitely help us defeat Black Emperor Shao. Brian said very confidently. I hope so. Although she believed in Darwin's prediction, Mora, who had seen the powerful strength of Hellfire Club Mutant, was still a little lacking in confidence. She murmured, then turned to look at Brian. Brian, what are you drawing? Hearing Mora's question, Brian raised his head from the sketchbook in his hand, and handed a comic he had just drawn to Mora, who was full of curiosity. Mora picked up the comic and looked at it curiously. This comic is in the form of a 4-frame comic. There are 4 different scenes on it. The first scene is very simple. In front of a huge amount of antennas, a bald young man sitting in a wheelchair was pressing his right hand on his temple. Next to him, there was a line of text. Professor X. In front of Professor X, there was a man showing a shark smile. The text was marked as Magneto. Above the 2 people, there was a text bubble. Eric, remember, your ability can be stimulated not only by anger and pain. Calmness will make you stronger. Behind them, there was a scene of a group of young mutants in training. And the second scene. A group of human soldiers were frantically attacking a man in a suit. Countless bullets hit the man's body, but did not cause the slightest effect on him. After the soldiers finished attacking, the man just raised his foot, and a terrifying energy shockwave instantly engulfed the soldiers. Above the man's head, it was written, Black Emperor Shao invaded CIA headquarters. The third scene. It was a bar. A man with a thick beard and wolf-like hair edges was smoking a cigar and drinking beer. There was an iron plate on the man's neck, which read, Wolverine Logan. Next to this man were Professor X, the bald wheelchair man in the first scene, and Magneto, the Fassbender man. The 2 were inviting Wolverine Logan. In response to the invitation, Wolverine Logan just looked at the 2 coldly, and there was a big text bubble next to Wolverine's mouth. Get lost. The 4th comic was only half drawn. Professor X in the comic was wearing a brainwave enhancer, and around him were light red figures. Brian, what is this? Mora pointed to the comic in his hand and asked in surprise. Mora, this is the future. Brian said with a smile on his face. The future? Mora looked at Brian in astonishment and subconsciously clenched the comic in his hand. Darwin often recorded the future scenes he saw in the form of paintings. However, Darwin did not learn professional painting. And as a watchmaker, I happen to have learned painting since I was a child. So, I became Darwin's painter and helped him record the future scenes. This is one of the future pictures I have recorded. From the beginning, Brian was ready to shape the dead Darwin into a prophet. Only in this way can Brian perfectly play his advantage as a plot prophet. Only in this way can Brian's various predictions be reasonable. For any unreasonable move, Brian can bring Darwin out and say, I got inspiration from Darwin's foresight. That is why Brian bought brushes and drawing paper at a roadside store before boarding the plane. He planned to directly draw the plot of the first battle of Mutant in the form of a comic in advance. When the time comes, after seeing this predictive comic, even Professor X will be convinced of Darwin's identity as a prophet. And the comic in Mora's hand is a few scenes of the first battle of Mutant. Moreover, in order to create a non-time linear prophecy, Brian deliberately disrupted the order of the plot. As for the bald Professor X in a wheelchair, this is Brian's bad taste. This is definitely to prove the accuracy of Darwin's prediction. Is this Professor X? Looking at the bald young man sitting in the wheelchair, Mora frowned slightly. Brian ignored Mora and continued his creation. Thanks to the painting ability of his predecessor as a watchmaker, the comics Brian depicted are vivid, and various scenes are at his fingertips, just like printing the pictures in his mind on paper. While Brian was busy drawing the predictive comics, the plane landed smoothly in Eagle Country. After Brian and Mora got off the plane, Mora directly got a car with the authority of the CIA agent, and then drove straight to Oxford University. An hour later, Oxford University. In the Newman Bar on campus. A group of young people are wantonly swaying their youth. In front of the bar, a handsome man in a gray custom suit was holding a glass of brandy, and his eyes were attracted by a pair of eyes. These eyes have completely different colors. Heterochromia, what a beautiful pair of eyes. Definitely, the girl with these eyes is also very beautiful. The handsome man walked up to the beautiful woman and said very gentlemanly, "This is really a unique gentleman's chat. However, since you are a gentleman, won't you buy me a drink?" The girl glanced at the handsome man and was obviously happy with the compliment he just gave her. "Definitely, beautiful lady. This glass of brandy is specially prepared for you." The handsome man handed the brandy in his hand to the girl with a smile on his face. Looking at the brandy in his hand, the smile on the girl's face disappeared, and she asked in surprise, "How do you know what I want to drink?" Faced with the girl's question, the handsome man smiled but said nothing. "My name is Charles Xavier. Beautiful Miss Amy, it's nice to meet you." The handsome man was the young Professor X, Charles Xavier. Opposite Professor X, the girl named Amy looked at Professor X with surprise. "How do you know my name is Amy?" Faced with Amy's question, Professor X shrugged casually. "I guessed. Amy, are you bothered by the fact that one of your eyes is green and the other is blue? In fact, you don't need to be so bothered. This is a typical genetic mutation. A very wonderful genetic mutation. This mutation makes you different from ordinary people and also makes you gifted with abilities. Amy, I can tell you with certainty that you are a mutant," Professor X said with admiration. However, when Amy heard Professor X say that she was a mutant, her face suddenly turned cold. First flirt with the girl, then tell her that you are a freak. Is this your strategy to pick up girls? Facing Amy's cold eyes, Professor X just smiled calmly. Mutation is a necessary process of biological evolution. Don't be afraid of it, Amy, you have to try to accept it. Professor X's face was full of sincerity, which made Amy couldn't help but be moved. Cheers to the mutation and glory you mentioned. Cheers. P.S. Here comes the first update. Please support the new book, please collect it, please rate it, please give me flowers, please comment on it, and please support me. Have fun reading every day during the National Day holiday. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 12, Professor X's Surprise and Curiosity, Mystique Raven. In the Newman Bar at Oxford University. Mora looked at Professor X, who was competing with a group of students and drinking beer from a huge amount of wine glass, with a grim expression. Then she lowered her head and looked at the precognitive comics Brian handed her again. Is this really Professor X? Mora was a little skeptical. The young man in front of her was completely different from the mature, stable, and bald wheelchair man Professor X in the precognitive comics she had just read. Not only because the current Professor X was not bald and in a wheelchair. It was also because of Professor X's personality. Professor X, who was still very young, looked like a man who only had women and beer in his eyes and had no sense of responsibility. This should be Professor X. Darwin often confused the future and the present. That's why some of the characters in my precognitive comics are what they will look like in the future. Brian shrugged casually and made up a story. I hope so. Mora had a very bad impression of the young Professor X in front of her. She looked at Professor X, whose eyes were a little blurry from drinking, and her mouth twitched slightly. However, out of trust in Brian, Mora was still ready to contact the overly young Professor X first. Professor X, we need your help, Mora said bluntly when she walked in front of Professor X, who was reveling. Professor X, who was already a little high, turned his head and looked at Mora subconsciously after hearing Mora's words. When he saw Mora's very beautiful blonde hair, Professor X's eyes lit up. Blonde gene, this is a very beautiful gene mutation. Beautiful lady, given your blonde gene, I am willing to spend 5 minutes to listen to what help you need. In addition, the name Professor X is really good, I like it very much. Professor X looked at Mora and said. No time to explain. Professor X, use your mind ability to read my memory, you will understand everything. Explaining everything she knew was too time-consuming for Mora. So, she directly grabbed Professor X's right hand and pressed it on her head. Professor X? Confused, Professor X subconsciously began to read Mora's memory. The next second, Professor X's hazy eyes gradually became serious. His brain, which had been paralyzed by alcohol and had been down for a while, began to restart. Through Mora's memory, Professor X saw everything that had happened to Mora recently. Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shao. White Queen Emma. Torrent. Red Devil. Black Emperor Zhao's conspiracy to provoke a nuclear war between the two superpowers. Similarly, in Mora's memory, Professor X also discovered the existence of Brian, and the prophet Darwin mentioned by Brian. When Professor X's right hand left Mora's head, he also sobered up. At this moment, Professor X had mixed feelings. On the one hand, he was a little excited to find a fellow mutant. On the other hand, after learning about the conspiracy of the fellow mutant, he felt helpless and angry. After all, in Professor X's view, mutants are just a symbol of genetic evolution, and they are still human in essence. So he couldn't understand Black Emperor Zhao's intention to use nuclear radiation to create a mutant world. He also couldn't understand Black Emperor Zhao's mutant supremacy theory. Agent Mora, I will help you stop Black Emperor Zhao's conspiracy. Professor X took a deep breath and said to Mora solemnly. The mutants of Hellfire Club are all very powerful. Ordinary human armies cannot stop Black Emperor Zhao. Only mutants can defeat mutants. Before that, can you introduce Mr. Brian to me? Professor X looked at Mora and said. Compared to Mora, Professor X is very interested in Brian in Mora's memory at this moment. No, to be precise, it is Brian and the prophet Darwin who has died. Through Mora's memory, Professor X learned about Brian's mutant ability. Adaptive evolution. Although Professor X only saw Brian's Shadowman state from Mora's memory. But as a professor of genetics, he knew very well what adaptive evolution meant. This means that Brian is the only mutant who can continue to evolve. This ability gives him the ability of almost immortality. But at the same time, survival of the fittest also has various disadvantages. First of all, Brian has no way to control this mutant ability. Secondly, it can only adapt to one extreme environment at a time. After sorting out Brian's information, Professor X made a summary. Brian is very strong, but limited. Compared with Brian, Professor X is more interested in Darwin, the level 4 precognitive mutant mentioned by Brian. Although Darwin is dead. But Professor X has seen the precognitive comics drawn by Brian from Mora's memory, called Mutant First Battle. Although Brian has not finished drawing that precognitive comic. But Professor X has a hunch that the first battle of mutant is their future. That is why Professor X is eager to get to know Brian. He hoped to learn more about the mysterious prophet from Brian's memory. Mr. Darwin. Professor X, that's Brian. As Professor X asked, Mora led Professor X to the bar counter. At this moment, a young and handsome Asian man was sitting casually on a bench at the bar counter, talking to a beautiful girl with an angel face and a devil figure with a smile on his face. This Asian man was Brian. As you can see, beautiful angel. I am a mutant. God has given me the ability to be gifted. In front of the bar counter, Brian smiled and inserted his right-hand fingers into the wine glass burning with blue fireworks. As Brian's fingers touched the blue fireworks, his adaptive evolution ability was activated instantly. His skin quickly turned into the same blue as the fireworks in the wine glass at a speed visible to the naked eye. It looked like a blue elf. There were also mysterious flame-like lines on his skin. It made Brian more handsome and mysterious. Cool. The girl in front of Brian was not surprised or panicked after seeing Brian's mysterious blue skin. Instead, she looked at him like a friend of the same kind. Brian, aren't you afraid that others will think you are a freak? Facing the concerns of the angel girl, Brian did not speak, but stood up and whistled. The shrill whistle sounded in the bar. The people in the bar subconsciously looked at Brian. When they saw Brian's blue skin full of mysterious flame patterns, everyone was shocked. Then everyone's eyes showed astonishment and fear. "Brian, let's go." The girl next to Brian stood in front of him with a worried face and said, "Raven, what are you doing here? Go home quickly. Professor X just came here and saw Brian showing off his ability." However, Professor X doesn't care about Brian now. He looked at the girl in front of Brian and asked sternly, "Charles, I'm an adult, I'm not a child anymore. This girl with an angel face and a devilish figure is the future Mystique Raven." As early as entering the bar, Brian's ability was constantly warning. The variant ability that sees through the laws of operation of everything makes it very easy for Brian to find Mystique Raven, who is drinking and drowning her sorrows in the crowd. Mystique Raven is every man's dream. It is also Brian's dream. So, Brian came directly to Raven without any hesitation. Then he stated his identity as a mutant and easily obtained Raven's recognition. The reason why the scene in front of him appeared is that Brian is going to use his ability to force his shadow into Raven's heart. He, Brian, wants to become Mystique Raven's sole mentor. Then transform Raven, from inside to outside, into Brian's shape. P.S. The second update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and please support it. Have fun reading every day on the 11th. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 13 Level 5 Talk Mutant Brian, Vought Corporation, and Compound 5. Inside the Newman bar. The deafening heavy metal music had disappeared. Instead, there was a solemn and surprised atmosphere. Everyone looked at the bar with disgust and fear. In front of the bar was Brian with blue flame skin. "Mr. Brian, don't reveal your identity as a mutant in front of ordinary people. This will bring you trouble." Behind Brian, Professor X frowned, put his right hand on his temple, and reminded him with telepathy. Telepathy can only convey Professor X's thoughts. There is no mental aggression. So it did not trigger Brian's ability to adapt to evolution. After hearing Professor X's reminder, Brian just turned around and smiled at Professor X. It must be said that Professor X is really young and handsome now. However, that's all. At this time, Professor X is not one of the future mutant leaders. So, facing Brian who casually showed his ability, Professor X just gave a kind reminder, but did not mean to stop Brian. "Raven, take a good look at what will happen if you rashly reveal your mutant ability." After reminding Brian, Professor X turned around and sent a telepathic message to Raven beside Brian. After hearing Professor X's reminder, Raven subconsciously looked around. When she saw the disgust and fear in these people's eyes, Raven's face became heavy. That was the look of looking at a freak. As a mutant, Raven definitely knew that these people might have regarded Brian, who casually revealed his ability, as a freak. "Brian, let's leave here." Raven pulled Brian with some concern and subconsciously took 2 steps back. She was afraid. From Brian, she saw the acceptance of ordinary people for mutants. It was almost impossible to accept the existence of mutants. This made Raven feel genuinely scared. Because this means that humans simply cannot accept Raven's original blue appearance. Seeing Raven's fear, Brian gently embraced her in his arms and comforted her softly. "Raven, remember what I said, we are God's favorites. We don't need to hide. And the reason why these people can't accept us and fear us is because they can't see the hope of becoming us. Once they see the hope of becoming us, they will become our fanatical worshippers. Even, they will fear us as if they were fearing God." Brian's low words successfully made Raven forget her fear. She looked at Brian steadily, and then couldn't help but give Brian a French kiss. When the kiss ended, Brian glanced around and then jumped directly onto the bar. Amid the fear and disgust of everyone, Brian calmly tidied up his clothes that were a little wrinkled because of the kiss. Then Brian looked down at everyone and said with a smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce myself solemnly. My name is Brian. Brian Kent. A few days ago, I was an unknown Brooklyn watchmaker. And now, a few days later, I have become a superpower with abilities. Not only can I turn my skin blue, I can also resist bullet attacks. When Brian said this, he took out his pistol from his pocket, pointed the gun at himself, and pulled the trigger without any hesitation. Bang! A deafening gunshot sounded in the bar. Under the shocked gaze of everyone, Brian, who was hit in the forehead by a bullet, was unharmed. I was not born with these abilities. Like you, I was originally just a group of ordinary people. But I am luckier than you. I was lucky to be selected by Water Company. They thought I had the potential to become a superhero, so they gave me abilities. When Brian said this, his voice paused for a moment. He was waiting for everyone to ask. Sure enough, a young man asked subconsciously after Brian paused. Did you get your ability from Water Company? What is Water Company? Facing the question, Brian's voice was always low and magnetic. Water Company is a genetic research institute dedicated to building a superhero star team. The philosophy of Water Company is that as long as you have a dream and as long as you have the potential to be a superhero, you can join Water Company. Water Company will tailor super abilities for you according to your genes. From now on, you will say goodbye to ordinary life and become a superhero that everyone is paying attention to. Brian explained the philosophy of Water Company with emotion. The people in the audience looked at each other at this moment. Unconsciously, the fear and disgust of these people towards Brian had quickly subsided. Instead, they were interested in and curious about Water Company. This era is the era of rapid development of personal heroism. Various superhero comics, movies, and TV series are developing rapidly. It also planted a superhero dream in the hearts of young people. If it is mutant, these people may find it difficult to accept. But if mutant is called a superhero, this group of people will easily agree with Brian. Mutant is born and cannot be reproduced. But superhero can be reproduced. Over the years, Captain America's comics have been popular all over the world. Brian is in the mutant universe, there is no superhero, only mutant. From 80-year-old men to children who have just learned to walk. Everyone knows that Captain America became a superhero from a thin human being because of a shot of super soldier serum. Many young people dream of getting such a super soldier serum. They originally thought that it was just their unrealistic fantasy. But after seeing Brian's ability, their inner superhero dream began to rekindle. Water Company? Superhero? Really? Can we become superheroes? Some young people now look at Brian differently. They no longer regard Brian as an alien freak. They want to become a guiding light for superheroes. Definitely, anyone can become a superhero. The body of a chameleon can change at will according to the environment. The tongue of a toad can stretch more than 10 meters in an instant. The Turritopsis dohrnii can live forever. In fact, this is all an ability of extraordinary ability. And what determines this ability is the gene sequence in your body. And this gene ability of most people is recessive. After years of hard work, our Water Company and the American military have jointly developed a genetic compound. Water Company named it Compound Number 5. Compound Number 5 can activate the recessive gene fragments hidden in the genes of ordinary people, so that you can gain the power of extraordinary ability. And our Water Company will help you develop your ability until you become a qualified superhero. While Brian was talking, he took out a blue candy from his pocket and said seriously. This candy was taken out by Brian from a candy store on the way here, and now it can be used as Compound Number 5. In order to verify the accuracy of Compound 5, I will randomly select an ordinary person for on-site testing. Brian said as he jumped off the bar, and then walked in front of Raven in full view of everyone. This beautiful angel, do you want to try the magic of Compound 5? Raven nodded very cooperatively. Then, under the gaze of everyone, she swallowed the blue candy. As Raven swallowed the blue candy, her body changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. P.S. The third update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and please support it. Have fun reading books every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 14, Ordinary People's Awe and Admiration, Raven's Admiration. Holy shit, compound number 5 is real. This girl really got super ability. Oh my god, Vought Company can really make superheroes. Inside Newman Bar. A group of ordinary people had no fear or disgust at all. On the contrary, they looked at Raven in front of them with fiery eyes, exclaiming in amazement. At this moment, Raven has restored her original appearance. Blue skin, blue scale pattern. The skin that is different from ordinary people not only did not destroy Raven's beauty, but made her look more dazzling. Especially her figure. The body is more hot and sexy, with a slender waist, convex front and back, and full of flexibility. It's simply a devil figure. Even if she just stands here, she can easily arouse men's desire. Raven, don't show your blue body. Looking at Raven in front of him, Professor X frowned even deeper. However, his telepathic communication was ignored by Raven. This was the first time she showed her mystique form in public. Similarly, this was the first time that Raven received praise instead of disgust and fear after showing her body. This feeling of being noticed and admired by everyone made Raven a little fascinated. Cool. Raven, you are the most beautiful and charming now. Beside Raven, Brian also gave a heartfelt compliment. Hearing Brian's exclamation, Raven looked up at Brian. At this moment, Raven's body and mind were all Brian's shadow. It was Brian who made her gain recognition and praise from everyone. It was also Brian who allowed her to show her ability in front of everyone as she pleased without being treated as a freak. Instead, she received cheers and applause. Yes, to cooperate with Brian. Raven not only showed her mystique form, but also performed various transformations. Every transformation would cause cheers and envy from everyone. Okay, Ms. Raven, welcome to join the Water Company. We will assist you in developing your own ability and provide you with all the necessary funding needs. Now, you can think of a superhero code name. Putting on a full show, Brian said to Raven with a serious face. Mystique. Raven said almost without thinking. The title of Mystique was something Raven had thought of a long time ago. Let's cheer for the new superhero, Mystique. Brian grabbed Raven's right arm and raised it high. The people in the whole bar suddenly cheered wildly. Mystique, Mystique. Water, water. Superhero, superhero. Everyone started cheering wildly. Originally, these people were skeptical of Brian's words. But after seeing with their own eyes that Raven became Mystique, these people no longer had any doubts. Even though the people here were all top students at Oxford University, they still sank uncontrollably into Brian's carefully crafted lies. They were full of envy for Raven who had obtained super abilities. They also wanted to become superheroes and obtain abilities. Vought Company welcomes anyone with superhero potential to join. As long as you join Vought Company, money, power, beauty, power, and fame are at your fingertips. Brian's voice was impassioned, making everyone eager to move. I want to join Vought Company. I want to be a superhero. I want to gain unparalleled power, money, beauty, and power. The whole bar was boiling. Everyone wanted to join the fictitious Vought Company. And everyone looked at Brian with only awe and admiration. No one doubted that Brian was lying. In America, which advocates freedom, even if you say that the earth is flat, there are still a large number of people who believe it and believe it firmly. Come and register your name now, and then you need to cultivate your superhero temperament in the following days until we judge that you meet the conditions for synthesis as a superhero. Vought Company will send you an invitation letter. Brian dismissed this group of fooled humans with a few words. It took only half an hour for these people to complete the registration, and then left the bar with the dream of becoming a superhero. Brian, you are really my hero. Mystique Raven hugged Brian with excitement. At this moment, Raven showed unique flexibility, hanging on Brian like an octopus. If Professor X was not still in the bar, Raven wanted to completely merge her body into Brian. Raven, remember what I said. We mutants are supreme. Brian stroked Raven's blue skin. Although she had blue scales on her body, it was surprisingly smooth and did not feel rough at all. Mutants are supreme. Raven said solemnly and enthusiastically. A pair of eyes looked at Brian affectionately. Okay, give me this list. Brian put Raven down and said calmly. Hearing Brian's words, Raven handed the list in his hand to Brian without any hesitation. Brian put the list away solemnly. He was really going to establish water company. On the one hand, it was to gather mutants in the name of water company, and then select high-quality mutants for brain opening. On the other hand, Brian was going to build water company into a superhero oligopoly company to attract and even unite the general public. Mutants are a minority after all. This world still respects humans. If you want to live a comfortable life in human society, you need the support of these ordinary people. And the hundreds of top students from Oxford University in front of you are the future team of water company. It has to be said that Brian has learned the true teachings of capitalists. Definitely, water company is a matter for the future. Mr. Brian, we should talk. After Brian put the list away, Professor X finally couldn't hold back and walked up to Brian, frowning and saying. Obviously, he was very dissatisfied with Brian's deceiving ordinary people. What made him even more dissatisfied was. It was okay for Brian to show his mutant ability. Raven actually followed suit. You know, Professor X has always regarded Raven as his sister. He knew very well how bad the situation of mutants was in this world. So, he always protected Raven very well. Raven was also very obedient. But since Brian appeared, everything has changed. Raven became rebellious. No longer obeyed Professor X's teachings. Professor X had a feeling that he was losing Raven. Professor X, you are very different from the image I got from Darwin. Brian turned to Professor X and said. Hearing Brian's words, Professor X's face obviously darkened. Professor X had also seen Darwin's precognitive comics, in which his image was a bald man in a wheelchair. Mr. Brian, I don't think I will become the bald wheelchair man predicted by Darwin. Professor X shrugged, quite confident, even a little conceited. Really? But Darwin's predictions are always correct. In the future, you will definitely be bald and in a wheelchair. Brian said tit for tat. Hearing Brian's words, Professor X finally couldn't help but break his defense. Don't eat the sour radish. He couldn't help but burst out a swear word and gave Brian a middle finger. The first meeting between the two was full of gunpowder. P.S. The 4th update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and beg for a wave of support. Have fun reading books every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 15, Mutant Classification, Mind Hacking, and Occlumency. Eagle Country, a single-family villa at Oxford University. This is the residence that Professor X bought for the convenience of teaching. As a true British aristocrat, Professor X is a veritable billionaire. Not only did he inherit a huge Xavier Manor, he also inherited hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. Buying a villa is just a drop in the bucket for Professor X. Evil capitalists. Brian couldn't help but complain while visiting the villa. Mora, Brian, please sit down. Coming to the living room of the villa, Professor X nodded to Brian and the others, and then poured 2 cups of coffee for them. Professor X, we have no time to waste, Black Emperor Zhao's plan may be implemented at any time. Sitting in the living room, Mora held a cup of coffee and reminded anxiously. As a CIA agent, Mora knew very well how tense the current international situation was. War was imminent. Mora, calm down. Professor X and I still have something to say. Seeing Mora, who was obviously anxious, Brian patted her shoulder gently and chuckled. Mora took a deep breath and calmed down. Then you guys chat first. Mora glanced at Brian and left the living room with Raven. Professor X and Brian were the only ones left in the living room. The two just looked at each other calmly, and no one spoke first. It was not until 5 minutes later that the young Professor X spoke first. "Mr. Brian, I'm curious about how you divide the mutants." Professor X asked with a hint of curiosity. Since checking Mora's memory, Professor X has been curious about Brian's classification of mutants. Before this, the ability level of mutants was very vague. Even Professor X could only feel that he was very strong. But he couldn't tell how strong he was. That's why he was eager to know how Brian divided mutants. "The mutant hierarchy was sorted out by my brother Darwin after he got inspiration from the future." Brian did not say that he established the mutant hierarchy. Instead, he attributed it to Darwin, who was already dead. In this way, even if Professor X wanted to get to the bottom of it, Brian could say that he didn't know. In fact, the mutant system was summarized by the vast number of Marvel fans in the previous life, and even Brian only had a vague understanding of it. How could he explain to Professor X clearly how he established this mutant hierarchy system? Anyway, just attribute everything to Darwin. Darwin divides mutants into 5 levels. Level 1 mutant, just awakening a mutant ability, but the ability is very weak, and they are completely unable to control their own abilities. Level 2 mutant, the mutant ability is slightly stronger than the level 1 mutant, and they have been able to initially master the ability, but they still often lose control. Level 3 mutant, the mutant ability is powerful, and they can control their abilities very well, and they have a certain combat effectiveness. Level 4 mutant, the ability is extremely powerful, and they can control their own abilities freely, like using their arms and fingers, and they have terrifying combat effectiveness. Level 5 mutant, only a very few mutants can reach this level. Usually, every level 5 mutant has a godlike ability, and conventional means can hardly defeat them. Definitely, according to Darwin, there is another level above the level 5 mutant, called the Omega level, also known as the God level mutant. This level of mutant can already be called the God of Mutants. Brian briefly introduced mutant hierarchy. According to the mutant hierarchy, what level am I? Professor X couldn't help asking. Level 4 mutant. Brian glanced at Professor X and said. What about Black Emperor Shao? Level 5 mutant. When Professor X heard that Black Emperor Shao was a level 5 mutant, his face fell. Is Black Emperor Shao so strong? Professor X said in disbelief. According to Brian, a level 5 mutant is as powerful as a god and is already difficult to kill. Black Emperor Shao can absorb the energy of nuclear reactors and can withstand nuclear explosions. Brian glanced at Professor X and gave a kind reminder. F***K, withstand nuclear explosions? Is he still a human being? Professor X couldn't help but swear again. He claimed to be knowledgeable, but when he heard that Black Emperor Shao could withstand nuclear explosions, he was still a little shocked. Mr. Brian, can you tell me about Darwin? I am very interested in his prediction ability. After learning about the level of mutants, Professor X became more interested in Darwin, a level 4 precognitive mutant. Definitely, Darwin is like you, and he has awakened his mutant ability since he was very young. Brian was about to start talking nonsense again. But obviously Professor X didn't want to spend time listening. He was going to use his mental power to directly invade Brian's brain to check the memory of the Prophet Darwin. The power of the mind is silent. But the moment Professor X released his mental power to invade Brian's brain, Brian already felt it. The moment his brain suffered a mental shock, it had already evolved a new ability. Brian called it brain occlusion. He could use his mind consciousness to completely seal his brain. All the memories, consciousness, mind, emotions, etc. in his brain were sealed in the deepest part of the mind world. Unless Professor X could find Brian's mind residence sealed in the deepest part of his subconscious and destroy it. Otherwise, Professor X would never be able to detect any of Brian's memories and inner thoughts. In addition to sealing his own memories and emotional thoughts, Brian's evolved brain occlusion also has an ability. That is to use mind consciousness to create false memories to resist the memory reading of the mind mutant. The false memories created by Brian have reached the level of being indistinguishable from the real thing. Not to mention Professor X now. Even Professor X, who will be in a wheelchair in the future, will not be able to find that these memories are false. Professor X, since you want to see it, then take a look. It just so happens that I can use these false memories to prove Darwin's identity as a prophet. Brian closed his eyes and began to weave false memories with his mind consciousness. In just a moment, Brian had completed the creation of false memories. At the same time, Professor X also began to read Brian's memory. At this moment, in the spiritual world, Professor X's spiritual consciousness sank into Brian's memory. Scenes of memory appeared in front of Professor X. When Brian was a child, he accidentally fell into the water, which made him awaken the mutant ability in a life-and-death crisis. When he was 7 years old, Brian found a black child who was graffitiing crazily under a bridge. This black child was Darwin in his childhood. Professor X casually stretched out his hand, and the originally scrolling memory picture stopped at this moment. Then the small theater in the memory reappeared in front of Professor X. "Brian Kent, you are finally here." Darwin, who was graffitiing crazily, stopped and turned to look at Brian. Brian in his childhood was startled by Darwin's pure white eyes. Who are you? Why do you know me?" Brian looked at Darwin with some fear and curiosity, and asked carefully. "I am Darwin, your kind and your future best friend. I have foreseen the future of you and me. I have also seen my destiny. In the future, you will become a being that everyone admires and fears. And I will be your guide, and I will use my ability to guide you in the direction of progress." Professor X looked at the frozen memory picture, then walked to the place where Darwin's graffiti was, and began to look at it carefully. Is this a nuclear explosion? Although the graffiti in front of him was like a ghost painting, after careful identification, Professor X still figured out what the graffiti represented. It was a nuclear explosion. A nuclear explosion that has not yet happened. P.S. The first update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and please support it. Have fun reading every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 16, Professor X's Approval, Brian's Psychic Ability, Occlumency. In the living room of Professor X's villa. Professor X put down his finger on his temple with shock and emotion. He took a deep look at Brian, his eyes full of complexity. Just now, he used his mental power to invade Brian's brain and read Brian's memory. He saw Brian in his childhood, who had just awakened his mutant ability, and was hated and feared by the people around him. He was even bullied. He became a freak in people's mouths. But even so, Brian never resented them, and never hid himself. He was not afraid to show his mutant ability in front of others. Even if he was feared and hated by the people around him. Brian in his childhood used his actual actions to tell others that his mutant ability was an ability. Professor X was moved by Brian's unwavering belief in his childhood. He also saw Brian in his childhood, after he met Darwin. Although Darwin was just a child, he turned into a life mentor and used his predictive ability. Constantly predicting the future, and then guiding Brian on how to develop his own mutant ability. He also saw that Brian and Darwin had a relationship like brothers. Similarly, he also saw the predictive comics that Brian and Darwin drew together when they were young. From the predictive comics, Professor X saw the scene of his childhood encounter with Mystique. He also saw the little boy screaming in pain in front of the Auschwitz concentration camp, and in front of the little boy was a gradually shape-shifting iron gate. Similarly, Professor X saw Black Emperor Shao, and behind Black Emperor Shao was a shocking nuclear explosion. He also saw that after the nuclear explosion, countless humans evolved into mutants due to nuclear radiation, but died miserably due to nuclear radiation. He also saw huge amounts of robots called Sentry. He also saw some scenes that were obviously in the future. However, these scenes were scattered and fragmented, and Professor X could not see the real future from these scattered future pictures. This was definitely Brian's intention. When creating false memories, Brian filled in a lot of X-Men plots in order to prove Darwin's identity as a prophet. However, in order to prevent Professor X from seeing the future through these plots and losing his plot advantage. Many of the plot scenes chosen by Brian are specious and look like that, but what they represent is not something Professor X can know. In Brian's memory, Professor X also saw the scene of Darwin's tragic death. In order to prevent the occurrence of a nuclear explosion in the future, Darwin used the predictive ability to find Black Emperor Shaw and tried to persuade Black Emperor Shaw to give up his plan. Then, Brian saw with his own eyes that Black Emperor Shaw cruelly cut open Darwin's head and destroyed his brain. Brian, who witnessed Darwin's death, was heartbroken. Years of brotherhood blinded him with hatred. He wanted to seek revenge on Black Emperor Shaw. However, Black Emperor Shaw was too powerful. He could not defeat him at all. That is why Brian found Mora and then found himself. Brian, I'm very sorry for Darwin's death. After the memory reading was over, Professor X's face was filled with grief. He was infected by Brian's pain in Brian's memory. Professor X, what did you do to me? Brian cooperated very well and recalled the feeling of grief after the memory was read, and asked with a painful face. I'm very sorry, Brian. I read your memory without your permission. Professor X stood up and apologized to Brian very sincerely. Then Professor X solemnly extended his right hand and invited Brian. Brian, I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation. Professor X, happy cooperation. Brian glanced at Professor X and knew that he had completely trusted him, which made Brian smile sincerely. As the two held hands together, it also marked that Brian successfully mixed into Professor X's team. After that, it only needs to steadily advance the plot, let Professor X use the brainwave enhancement machine to search for mutant, and Brian can fish in troubled waters and find powerful mutant ability to harvest. Brian, according to Darwin's prophecy, how should we stop the Black Emperor? Professor X humbly asked Brian for advice. After checking Brian's memories, Professor X was convinced of Darwin's identity as a prophet. That is why he is Darwin's brother and partner in the predictive comics. Brian is also a half-prophet. Darwin once said that in the west coast port of Miami, Florida, another future mutant leader, Seen Man, will appear to assassinate Black Emperor Shao. To defeat Black Emperor Shao, we need the help of this Seen Man. Brian casually told Professor X the next plot. Another mutant leader? Seen Man? Is this a code name? Or his ability? Professor X was confused. He always felt that the Seen Man in Brian's mouth was a nickname, but he couldn't find evidence. That's what Darwin said. Brian shrugged and pushed everything to Darwin. Okay, let's go to Miami to meet this Seen Man. Professor X thought for a moment and decided to go to Miami, Florida according to Brian's prophecy. Since he had decided to go to Miami, Professor X no longer hesitated, and he directly told Mora and Mystique Raven his decision through telepathy. Cool, are we going to fight? After hearing Professor X's decision, Raven was excited. But Mora frowned. Professor X, Brian, I think we should first report the intelligence of Black Emperor Shao to CIA headquarters. As a CIA agent, Mora's first thought was to report the situation of Mutant and Black Emperor Zhao's conspiracy. Mora, the CIA top brass will not tolerate the existence of Mutant. Brian glanced at Mora and said calmly. Now that he has successfully infiltrated Professor X's team, Mora's role has been minimal. He definitely won't let Mora report the situation of Mutant to the CIA top brass. Once the CIA top brass knows the existence of Mutant, they will immediately lock all mutants in the laboratory and conduct inhumane research. At that time, the situation of Mutant will be even worse. Brian, you have to believe in the CIA top brass, they will not catch all mutants in one fell swoop. Faced with Brian's persuasion, Mora always insisted that the situation should be reported. This made Brian frown. His expression gradually changed from calm to indifferent, and his eyes were no longer gentle when looking at Mora. He walked in front of Mora, and in the puzzled eyes of Mora and Professor X, he pressed his right hand on Mora's forehead. Clenched brain. Brian muttered silently, and his mind consciousness instantly released the newly evolved clenched brain. Unlike the abilities that evolved from the body in the past, which would disappear and degenerate with extreme environments. There is no such thing as degeneration in the evolution of brain consciousness. Since the evolution of a clenched brain, it has been engraved on Brian's mind consciousness. Brian can use this ability anytime and anywhere, and use it as if it were an arm. Occlusive brain is already Brian's second variant ability. From now on, anyone who wants to explore Brian's memory will return in vain. At this moment, Brian pressed his right hand on Mora's forehead. The mind consciousness activated the occlusive brain. His mind consciousness instantly sank into Mora's brain. Then Mora's memories of the past few days were quickly read out by Brian. Occlumency can use the mind to seal all memories, emotions, thoughts, etc. deep in the brain. Similarly, it also has a certain ability to read memories. Definitely, it is different from Professor X, who can read all memories instantly. Occlumency can only read other people's memories for a few days. But for Brian, it is enough. Buzz. Brian quickly found Mora's memories of the past few days, and then used occlumency to seal all these memories deep in her subconscious. When Brian put down his right hand, Mora's originally clear eyes became confused. Why am I here? Who are you? P.S. The second update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, and please support it. Have fun reading books every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 17, Mora is offline, Brian is ruthless, everything for Mutant. Why am I here? Who are you? In Professor X's private villa, Mora looked at Brian and others with a confused face, and her tone of voice became stiff and unfamiliar. Agent Mora, do you really not remember? Brian looked at Mora calmly and asked. Remember what? Mora looked at Brian with a confused face. You came to Oxford University and drank too much yesterday, and I kindly brought you back here. Brian said without blushing or beating his heart. Really? Hiss, why can't I remember it? Mora looked at Brian suspiciously, trying to recall what happened yesterday. However, the more she recalled, the more drowsy her brain became, and she even felt a little tingling. Not only yesterday, she couldn't remember the memories of the past few days at all. Agent Mora? Brian's voice gradually brought Mora back to her senses. She glanced at Brian and the other two, but found that she had no impression of them at all. I think they should be some insignificant people. Hangovers make the brain drowsy. Would you like a cup of coffee? Brian casually took a cup of coffee from the coffee machine next to him and handed it to Mora with a smile on his face. Thank you for your kindness, sir. However, I have to leave here. I still have a mission to complete. Mora left the villa directly after she finished speaking. Looking at Mora leaving, Professor X frowned and looked at Brian. Brian, what did you do to Mora? Facing Professor X's questioning, Brian just said lightly, nothing, I just deleted her memory about us and Mutant. Professor X was stunned for a moment. He looked at Brian in surprise, not knowing that Brian actually had other mutant abilities. Can you delete Mora's memory? Professor X asked subconsciously. Brian had been waiting for Professor X's question. In fact, after using the brain block technique to seal Mora's memory, Brian knew that Professor X would definitely ask. And Brian had already thought of an excuse. To be honest, I was also surprised. Professor X, you should know that my ability is survival of the fittest. I can adapt to extreme environments, so that my body can evolve. After you used your mind power to read my memory, I found that I had adapted to a new ability. Moreover, this ability does not seem to degenerate with the disappearance of the extreme environment. Brian was a little excited and explained incessantly. As if seeing the doubts of Professor X and Raven, Brian spoke again. In short, I have adapted to a new variant ability. This is the first time this has happened to me in all these years. This is incredible. Brian had just finished speaking when Raven admired Brian and said, Brian, your variant ability is so strong that you can adapt to a new variant ability. What is the second ability you have obtained? Memory deletion. I can delete the memory in my brain through my mind by touching someone's skin. However, this ability is very weak. I can only delete up to 3 days of memory. Brian definitely would not tell Professor X that he has the ability of brain occlusion. Before Professor X asked, Brian had already thought about how to disguise his brain occlusion. Among the American TV heroes, there is a Haitian who has the ability of memory deletion. Brian directly applied his ability to brain occlusion. Anyway, the effect of being blocked by brain occlusion is no different from memory deletion. Can the mutant ability of survival of the fittest actually adapt to new mutant abilities? Brian, you are stronger than I thought. Professor X also said with some envy. Although he knew that Brian's mutant ability was very strong and almost nothing could kill him. However, adapting to a new mutant ability still shocked him with Brian's potential. Professor X, I can actually adapt to a new mutant ability, which really excites me. Brian seemed to be completely immersed in excitement. It was not until 5 minutes later that Brian sighed helplessly. It's a pity that I can't control my ability at all. Maybe adapting to the situation of memory deletion is just a coincidence. Looking at Brian, who was a little ups and downs, Raven walked to Brian's side, hugged him gently, and comforted him. Brian, you will definitely be able to master your ability, and then adapt to the second and third mutant abilities, come on. Thank you, Raven. Brian smiled, he held Raven's cheek and gave her a long kiss. His goal was achieved. In the future, even if he cut the brains of other mutants and plundered their abilities, as long as Professor X didn't see it, he could push it to his own adaptive evolution. Asked, it is the new ability that I adapted to. What? Why is my ability similar to other mutants? Isn't that normal? I adapted to the new ability through the stimulation of other mutants. Is this reasonable? This is very reasonable. Brian found an excuse to use the plundering ability reasonably, which made him feel very good. He even wanted to celebrate with Raven. However, the presence of Professor X disturbed Brian's interest. Brian, you haven't told me why you want to delete Mora's memory. Professor X continued to ask. If the human leaders know the existence of mutants, what is the first reaction? Brian did not answer Professor X, but asked earnestly. Catch all mutants. Professor X answered subconsciously. That's why I deleted Mora's memory. If Mora told the CIA leaders about the existence of mutants, it would be equivalent to making mutants public, and the human leaders would eliminate us at all costs. Hearing Brian's words, Professor X was silent. As a spiritual mutant, Professor X is more aware of the ugliness of human nature. He knows very well what kind of reaction the human leaders will make once they know the existence of mutant. It is good to catch and study them. What awaits mutant will be the full strangulation of humans. In order to eliminate dissidents, humans will do anything. Professor X sighed, he knew Brian's approach was right. But he still couldn't accept it. After all, Mora has been with you for a few hours, and she has regarded you as a friend. Professor X said with a wry smile. Professor, I know. Mora is my friend. It hurts me to delete her memory. Brian took a deep breath, and then his face turned cold. But, for the future of mutant, the necessary sacrifice is worth it. In order to prevent my fellow mutants from being chased by the human military, I am willing to make sacrifices. Everything is for mutant. Brian said righteously. However, in fact, Brian had no psychological barriers to deleting Mora's memory. Mora is just a stepping stone for Brian to get close to Professor X. Now, he has joined Professor X's team. Mora is dispensable. Although he had a relationship with Mora, there are hundreds of women who have had relationships with him, all kinds of women, so what does Mora count for? It would have been fine if Mora had listened to advice before. However, Mora still insists on her own opinion, so don't blame Brian for being ruthless. P.S. The third update is here. Please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, please support me. Have fun reading books every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 18, Heading to Miami, Professor X's Fury of Impotence. Dear passengers, the flight to Miami, Florida is about to land. Please sit tight and hold on. On the flight to Miami, Brian, Professor X and Raven were sitting in the first-class cabin. After solving the problem of Mora, Brian and the other two took the plane without stopping, ready to go to Miami to save Magneto, who was about to be beaten by Black Emperor Shaw. At this moment, Brian was sitting in a soft and comfortable seat, concentrating on drawing the premonition comic. And Raven was holding several comics drawn by Brian in both hands, watching with curiosity. Brian's premonition comics still use the format of 4-frame comics. In the comics, a huge amount of luxury cruise ships are clearly depicted. On the cruise ship, members of the Hellfire Club are having a celebration party. On the surface of the cruise ship, a man with a face full of hatred is opening his hands, and a thick chain is entangled on the cruise ship like a python. The subsequent comic screen shows that the man is being beaten by Black Emperor Shaw with a desperate look on his face. Is this what's going to happen in Miami? Professor X also looked at Brian's precognitive comic with a serious face, and asked in surprise. Yes, this is the future that is going to happen. Brian nodded calmly. Brian, is this Scene Man's ability to control steel? Then he should not be called a Scene Man, but Magneto. On Brian's left, Raven pointed at the man who was controlling steel in the comic and said with a smile. Brian turned his head and glanced at Raven. He had to admit that Raven was really keen on giving code names to mutants. Speaking of which, whether it was Professor X, Magneto, or the code names of the X-Men, they were all given by Raven. This can be regarded as a little code name expert. When Brian finished the last precognitive comic, the plane happened to land at Miami Airport. The three walked out of the airport. Standing outside the airport, Professor X and Raven looked at Brian. Which port is the cruise ship of the Black Emperor Shaw in? Professor X even asked. Professor X, you seem to rely too much on Darwin's prophecy. Darwin once said that his prophecy can only guide us in the direction. But we still need to find out where the Black Emperor Shaw is hiding. Brian looked at Professor X's expression and said solemnly. He just knew the plot. The plot will not show the specific location coordinates. How could he know which port the Black Emperor Shao's cruise ship was docked at? After hearing Brian's solemn warning, Professor X was stunned for a moment, and then he smiled bitterly. Just as Brian said, he relied too much on Darwin's prophecy. So much so that he forgot that he was also a mutant. And he was a level 4 psychic mutant. Professor X was no longer confused. He pressed his right hand on his temple, and the huge psychic power instantly enveloped the entire Miami. As the strongest telepathist in the world, Professor X's telepathy range can reach hundreds of kilometers. This is almost the size of a New York City file. As Professor X released telepathy, countless psychic consciousness projections appeared in front of Professor X. Then came the mental thoughts like a tsunami. The noisy sound made Professor X look painful. His fingers on his temples began to tremble because of this. The third port. The next second, Professor X said the port where the Black Emperor Shaw cruise ship was located with some pain, and then he withdrew his mental power with some exhaustion. Professor X is now only a level 4 mutant. It is still a long way from the bald professor who can wipe out half of the Earth's consciousness with a thought in the future. Let's go to the third port. After getting the information he wanted, Brian patted Professor X's shoulder with a smile on his face, and said with a chuckle. Are you okay, Professor X? Can you still walk? If not, I can find a wheelchair for you. Hearing Brian's teasing words, Professor X, who was originally panting wildly, gave Brian a middle finger. It seems that you don't need help, Professor. Let's go, Raven, let's go to the third port. Brian shrugged, then pulled Raven to stop a taxi, and then drove away. Brian, is it really okay if we don't wait for Professor X? In the taxi, Raven looked at Professor X, who was getting farther and farther away, with some concern, and said, "Raven, I don't want him to disturb our world of two people." Brian gently hugged Raven and said gently, "Brian." Listening to Brian's words like a lover, Raven couldn't help but be moved. A charming atmosphere spread in the taxi. Until Brian spoke up and broke the atmosphere. "Raven, turn into a succubus, with a heart-shaped tail." "Raven?" Raven was stunned for a moment, then rolled her eyes at Brian. However, due to her affection for Brian, she still met Brian's somewhat strange XP requirements. Cool. Looking at the graceful and charming succubus in front of him, with a heart-shaped tail swaying constantly, Brian whistled with fiery eyes. "Nige, change the destination, go to Vienna Hotel." With such a beauty in his arms, Brian's appetite was excited. The plan to save the situation can be postponed temporarily. He has more important things to do now. Professor X watched the taxi suddenly change lanes, which made him stunned for a moment. Then he couldn't help but curse Brian with telepathy. "Don't eat the sour radish, damn Brian. F***K. Brian ignored Professor X's telepathy. The taxi took Brian and Raven to Vienna Hotel. F***K. Professor X, who had finally recovered, looked at the taxi going away and wanted to kill Brian. He had always regarded Raven as his own sister. How could he not be mad when he saw a man he had just met for less than a day abduct his sister? However, Raven had no opinion, so Professor X could only be furious. Professor X simply turned a blind eye. He directly used his mind power to control a white man driving a Ferrari supercar and let him hand the Ferrari to Professor X. Then Professor X stepped on the accelerator and the Ferrari sped away. He wanted to go to the third port by himself to investigate the movements of the Hellfire Club in advance and see if there was a chance to rescue the people in Darwin's prediction. Magneto. By the way, wait for Brian and Raven. F***K. Professor X, who was driving, couldn't help but swear again. P.S. The fourth update is here. Thank you to Galaxy for your 100-point reward and monthly ticket. Thank you for your support. Please support my new book, please collect it, please rate it, please give me flowers, please comment on it, and please support me. Have fun reading during the National Day holiday. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 19 Young Magneto, Magneto being beaten, please collect. 6 hours later, it was almost dusk. The setting sun cast a golden glow, shining on the water, sparkling and beautiful. Brian came to the third port of Miami with Raven, who was also smiling. It must be said that Mystique Raven is simply a man's dream. Brian experienced the kaleidoscopic shape-shift ability of Mystique Raven. It turns out that Raven can not only transform into various female forms. Even the humanoid female images such as Angel with white wings, Succubus with heart-shaped tail, and Demon with goat horns on his head can be transformed. This made Brian ecstatic. Because Mystique Raven can meet any XP requirements of Brian. Without paying attention, he experienced Raven's transformation ability for 6 hours. As soon as he arrived at the port, Brian saw the super luxury cruise ship anchored by the port. And on the cruise ship, Black Emperor Shao and others were holding a celebration party. In the water below the cruise ship, a man in black was quietly swimming towards the cruise ship. On the shore, Professor X was holding his right hand on his temple and communicating with the man in black. "Eric, don't let hatred get to your head. You can't defeat Black Emperor Shao. You are only a level 3 mutant now, while Black Emperor Shao is a level 5 mutant. The gap between you is too obvious." "Shut up, Charles." The man in black in the water couldn't stand Professor X's nagging, so he turned around and yelled at Professor X. This man in black was the future Magneto Eric Lencher. However, Magneto was only in his 20s and was still very young. At the same time, his mutant ability had barely reached the level of a level 3 mutant. Since the end of World War II, Magneto has been hunting down Black Emperor Shao all over the world. This made his ability to manipulate metal advance by leaps and bounds. But it still cannot reach the level of level 4 mutant. Only Magneto, who has evolved into the state of Fashion after special training by Professor X, can be among the ranks of level 4 mutant. As for level 5 mutant, that will have to wait until the ancient mutant god Apocalypse is revived. Brian looked at the young Magneto, who was blinded by hatred and stood on the shore to watch the show. Professor X, it seems that you have gained Magneto's trust. Brian walked to Professor X while watching Magneto swim towards the luxury cruise ship in front, patted his shoulder and said with a smile. F***K, Brian, you are finally here. Looking at Brian beside him, Professor X's eyes were complicated. On the one hand, he was angry that Brian kidnapped Raven. On the other hand, he was full of admiration for Brian. There is no doubt that Brian is a role model for men. How is the situation over there with Black Emperor Shao? Brian did not care about Professor X's complicated eyes, but looked at the luxury cruise ship and asked. Black Emperor Shao has discovered us. After hearing Brian's question, Professor X's face became serious. He then told Brian what had happened during this period. While Brian and Raven were fighting, Professor X also came to the third port. And he happened to meet Magneto, who was also following Black Emperor Zhao's footsteps. Although it was only their first meeting, the two hit it off immediately. Especially after they found out that the other party was a mutant of their own. And the target was Black Emperor Shao. The two sides had a long talk on the shore. They were surprised to find that the two sides had surprisingly similar ideas about mutant. This made them talk happily. It only took a few hours for Professor X and Magneto to become close friends. Professor X even told Magneto about Black Emperor Zhao's crazy plan. He even told Magneto about the existence of Brian, Raven, and the Prophet Darwin. And Magneto told Professor X about his tragic experience in the concentration camp when he was a child. Then Professor X invited Magneto to join his team to fight against Black Emperor Shao together. Magneto readily agreed. However, the two sides had some disagreements on how to fight against Black Emperor Shao. Professor X believed that Black Emperor Shao was very powerful, and the 4 mutants on his side alone could not fight against Black Emperor Shao. Professor X planned to find some powerful mutants before facing Black Emperor Shao. However, Magneto spent more than 10 years and went through untold hardships to finally find the trace of Black Emperor Shao. He did not want to give up this rare opportunity. Even if Professor X popularized the classification of mutants for him. Magneto was also fearless. That was why the scene just happened. We hit it off at first sight? A confidant? Brian felt a chill as he looked at Professor X, who was smiling like an ant, and quietly moved away from Professor X. Brian, we must stop Eric. He is not yet a match for Black Emperor Shao. Professor X did not notice Brian's disgusted expression, and his eyes were always on Magneto. Looking at Magneto approaching the cruise ship, Professor X said anxiously. How to stop him? You also said that Magneto is now blinded by hatred. Brian shrugged, and he just watched quietly. Charles, can't you use your mental power to make Magneto give up revenge? Beside Brian, Raven, who had just recovered from the afterglow, said to Professor X in confusion. She knew very well that Professor X's mental power could easily change a person's mind. It was easy to make Magneto give up revenge. Raven, I can't do this. This way Eric will stand against us. And I will lose him as a friend. Professor X shook his head seriously and said. Okay, Charles, you are happy. Raven glanced at Professor X, then at Magneto, who had already boarded the cruise ship, and no longer cared about the two of them. Brian ignored Professor X, his eyes were always on Magneto. The scene of Magneto being beaten up is rare. At this moment, on the deck of the luxury cruise ship Victoria. The mutants of the Hellfire Club are gathered here. Cheers to the coming mutant era. Black Emperor Shao said with champagne in his hand. Cheers. White Queen Emma, Riptide, Red Devil and Colonel Henry, who had just joined the Hellfire Club, raised their glasses together. Black Emperor Shao. Just after Black Emperor Shaw drank the champagne, a roar of anger and hatred sounded on the deck. Black Emperor Shao was stunned for a moment, and then he saw Magneto, who was wearing black clothes and holding a pure steel dagger with the words, "Bloodline and Honor," engraved on it, on the deck. "It's little Eric, come quickly, let the teacher love you well." Black Emperor Shao was shocked when he saw Magneto, and then his face showed sincere excitement and relief. Magneto looked at Black Emperor Shao in front of him with a very complicated look. Even he had to admit that it was Black Emperor Shao who made him successful. But Black Emperor Shao should not have killed his mother. Go to hell. Magneto looked at Black Emperor Shao angrily, without any idea of reminiscing about the past. He raised his hand directly, and the pure steel dagger in his hand flew up instantly, and then rushed towards Black Emperor Shao at a very fast speed. Too slow, so slow that I don't even have the desire to take action. Looking at the dagger coming, Black Emperor Shao frowned slightly, and his eyes looking at Magneto were full of dissatisfaction. Click. Black Emperor Shao just stretched out his hand and easily grabbed Magneto's dagger. The kinetic energy and magnetic field on the dagger were instantly absorbed by Black Emperor Shao the moment they touched him. "Little Eric, my most proud student, you are wasting your ability. It seems that the pain I have caused you is not enough." Black Emperor Shao played with the dagger in his hand and said with some regret. After that, Black Emperor Shao turned the dagger around and then let go. Whoosh! The dagger pierced Magneto's shoulder and pierced his scapula at a faster speed than when it came. K-it, Black Emperor Shao. Although his right arm was bleeding, Magneto still roared at Black Emperor Shao like a mad lion. At this moment, his hatred for Black Emperor Shao reached its peak. The pain made his ability increase rapidly. Magneto stretched out his left hand toward the shore, and the vehicles and containers parked in the port began to tremble wildly. Then all the vehicles and containers were sucked into the air by Magneto, and then turned into a torrent of steel, pouring madly towards the deck of the cruise ship. TSK, he is indeed a scene man. Sure enough, he made a big scene with one move. P.S. The first update is here, please support the new book, please collect it, please evaluate it, please give flowers, please comment, please support it. Have fun reading every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 20, T0 Mutant Team, The Power of Hellfire Club. Port number 3 in Miami. Brian turned into a fun-loving person, watching the battle on the cruise ship with great interest. At this moment, on the cruise ship, Magneto slowly stood up, raised his left hand, and above his head, there were suspended cars and containers. Magneto opened his left hand slightly. All the cars and containers began to disintegrate. From the original hole, it quickly turned into dense steel fragments. Good job, Eric. Keep going. Opposite Magneto, Black Emperor Shao looked up at the steel fragments above his head, and did not hide his admiration for Magneto. Black Emperor Shao, die for me. Magneto roared, and then clenched his left hand. The dense steel fragments turned into a steel torrent like a storm, sweeping the entire deck. Facing Magneto's range attack, the mutants of Hellfire Club didn't care. Black Emperor Shao even had the leisure to continue pouring himself a glass of champagne. White Queen Emma was just lazily lying on a sun lounger, enjoying the sunset. In the other two directions of the deck, Red Devil Azazo was whistling while trimming his sharp nails with a knife. And the Rapid sat there in silence, not even looking at Magneto. Magneto felt that he was ignored. He worked harder to push his ability. The steel torrent, which was already like a storm, soared in speed. Countless steel fragments shot on the deck like bullets. The champagne originally used for the celebration banquet shattered one after another. The wooden deck was even more unrecognizable after being hit by the fragments. But the mutants of the Hellfire Club were calm under the steel torrent. Black Emperor Shao just stood there, letting the steel fragments hit him. All the fragments lost all their power the moment they touched Black Emperor Shao and fell down one after another. Black Emperor Zhao's variant ability makes him completely immune to physical attacks. These steel fragments will not only not cause any harm to him, but also provide him with a lot of kinetic energy, making him stronger. White Queen Emma, by simply turning her body into diamond, perfectly blocked the attacking steel fragments. Red Devil turned into a ball of red mist and disappeared on the deck. And Riptide flicked his hand lightly, and the surrounding air instantly turned into a tornado, blocking all the steel torrents. When Magneto's steel torrent ended, all the mutants of the Hellfire Club were safe and sound. There was only one unlucky guy on the entire deck who was killed by Magneto. That was Colonel Henry, who had just joined the Hellfire Club. Shao, Colonel Henry is dead. White Queen Emma released the diamond form, then walked in front of Colonel Henry, who was stabbed into a sieve, and reminded him. If you die, you die. It's nothing more than finding another partner. Black Emperor Shao just looked at Colonel Henry with an indifferent look, and then walked towards Magneto. Come on, Eric. We are your destination. Join us, let's create a world with only mutants together. Black Emperor Shao walked to Magneto and invited Magneto. Black Emperor Shao, I agree with your ideas. But you killed my mother. Magneto looked at Black Emperor Shao with anger, then raised his left hand, and the dagger that fell on the deck instantly stabbed Black Emperor Shao from behind. Whoosh! A sharp sound of breaking wind sounded behind Black Emperor Shao. However, facing Magneto's sneak attack, Black Emperor Shao just raised his hand lightly. The dagger that came at a high speed was instantly fixed in the air by Black Emperor Shao. Then the dagger slowly fell. As the only level 5 mutant in the world, Black Emperor Shao has reached the pinnacle in the development of his mutant ability. Absorbing energy from a distance is just a routine operation. Eric, have I told you about my mutant ability before? Black Emperor Shao reached out and pulled Magneto up from the ground, then took out a piece of chocolate from his pocket and placed it in the palm of Magneto's left hand. No. Looking at the chocolate in his hand, Magneto inevitably recalled his tragic experience as a child. He looked at Black Emperor Shao, who was close at hand, and the fear buried deep in his heart made him subconsciously answer Black Emperor Zhao's words. Well, it seems I haven't said it yet. I can absorb any form of energy and convert it into my own energy and store it. This keeps my cells in peak condition at all times. It allows me to stay young forever. To be honest, if it was just the ability of immortality, it would be too boring. The interesting thing is that I can release the energy in my body. Like this. Black Emperor Shao casually introduced his variant ability, and then, in Magneto's horrified eyes, he raised his right index finger and gently tapped Magneto's body. The energy that Black Emperor Shao had absorbed before was released from his fingers, and a dazzling energy ball enveloped Magneto. Boom! A huge amount of explosive energy knocked Magneto directly into the water. Black Emperor Shao only released the energy stored by Magneto's steel torrent before. Even so, the degree of explosion of these energies is almost equivalent to that of high-explosive grenades. Hit by such a close-range energy explosion, Magneto was seriously injured and unconscious. This was because Magneto saw the situation was not good when the explosion occurred, and used the steel fragments on the deck to form a steel shield, so he was lucky enough not to be killed or maimed by the energy of the Black Emperor Shao. Even so, Magneto's body is now in a terrible state. His skin is bloody and his wounds almost reveal his bones. The blood almost instantly dyed the water red. Eric. On the shore, Professor X saw that Magneto was seriously injured and his body was gradually sinking into the water. He couldn't sit still. Although they had just met, Professor X had already regarded Magneto as his confidant. At this moment, seeing that his friend was not sure whether he was alive or dead, Professor X was immediately extremely anxious. Fortunately Eric is still alive. Professor X pressed his right hand on his temple, and his spiritual power instantly invaded Magneto's brain. After discovering that Magneto was still conscious, Professor X breathed a sigh of relief. Then he jumped directly into the water. Professor X, what are you doing? Professor X's sudden action stunned Brian, who was eating melons, and he asked Professor X in confusion. "Don't eat the sour radish, Brian, don't you see I'm saving people?" Professor X swam towards Magneto, who was sinking to the bottom, and said to Brian unhappily, "The distance between you and Eric is a full 200 meters. Are you going to swim all the way over?" Brian stood on the shore, took a look at the distance between Professor X and Magneto, and said jokingly, F***K. Brian, either help or get out. Professor X said to Brian angrily while swimming hard in the water. "I'm anxious." "You're anxious." Looking at the frustrated Professor X, Brian felt happy. Then he moved his hands and feet slightly, and then jumped into the water. "Now, it's my home court. P.S. The second update is here. Please support the new book, please collect, please evaluate, please flowers, please comment, please support me. Enjoy reading every day during the National Day holiday. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Top up now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. You are listening to it in Eugene Light Novels.